But
It's
wonderful to
okay.
meet you. Yeah, wonderful to meet
You
you. Like,
too. You too.
yeah.
It's great to meet you as well.
And thanks for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it. This was a big ask. I know this is a behemoth of a fucking book.
No worries, no
Yeah.
worries. I would have gotten to it eventually, but I really appreciate you reaching out and asking me about it because I really love this book. I mean, do you have which version do you have um 'cause I see your cover's a little bit different, so I have the
The
hardcover.
Johnny Woods translation.
Oh yeah, same.
Yeah.
I heard that was like the best translation, and I know he did like Bottom's Dream as well. Probably the worst book to ever translate. So so I was like, if he can do Bottom's Dream, then the Magic Mountain should be like Goodnight Moon for him. Like
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy, heavy, heavy.
Bored.
I may say male is entirely hostile. No! You know,
Resources.
life, friends, is boring. We must not say so.
It is, like that's the problem too. I mean, we can get into this too as we go into the podcast. Kind of like when you're reading translated works, sometimes, I guess it depends on the language. Like everyone talks, so much is lost in translation, of course, we agree. But like sometimes, depending on who's translating, it can be very stiff, like especially when you come to the
Mhm.
Slavic languages, when you're like translate, I guess English and German translates well into English, vice versa. But like, yeah, some of those other languages, the Slavic languages, even like, yeah, like Asian languages and stuff, like Eastern languages, they just don't, you miss so much, like it almost comes like stilted, like when you get like the English translation. So yeah, I was also impressed. I was like, oh, this reads really like it reads like it's not a translation for people listening. Yeah. Like it reads like that.
Right, right. His prose is so complex, and I think that I think the translation kind of and like but yeah, like if I knew like nothing about Thomas Mann and nothing about the background, didn't know this was translated, I wouldn't even have suspected it. I mean, the prose reads so fluidly, and I think the complexity of his original writing is captured here. I mean, there's just so many lines that really stick out to me, particularly pertaining to like his descriptions of the characters. Like there was this one description of Madame Cochard that felt particularly it felt almost kind of savage. Like I think Hans Castorp described her as having like eyes that look like the cracks in a muffin.
Yes.
You don't know,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. That was a very distinct one. Yeah. Was that
Mhm.
Barons, the doctor,
I
when they're
believe
talking about
it.
her skin, right? When they're talking about the portrait and like her skin and like that's, I want to get to all that
Right.
too. Yeah, I want to get to all that too. Yeah. But yeah,
Yeah, I
let's keep,
believe.
no, go on, please.
Oh, I believe it was Hans Castorp saying it in that scene, which is kind of interesting because there's something very clinical about like looking at someone that way, especially this woman that he's supposedly attracted to.
And he becomes like this kind of amateur doctor as he spends his time up there, like this kind of like
Mm.
amateur biologist, this amateur debate club guy. Like it's very, I want to get to all that. Yeah. Because you were pointing this out as we were chatting about it and all that too. But yeah, all right. Yeah. I mean, if you're good to go, I'm good to go.
Me too, me too. I think it was good to chat for a little bit just to like kind of warm up a little bit. Like I get all the stutters out of the way,
Yeah, yeah,
especially.
yeah. I know it's awkward too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I always try to make people feel as comfortable as possible. But I know it's weird. Like you're talking to somebody you've never met via screen and shit. It's like it's okay. Like that's a little bit weird. So it's like,
No
all right,
worries.
we have a common thing and we have something in common. So we have a book in
No
common to talk
worries.
about, MFA, all of that stuff to talk about. But yeah,
No
Maggie,
worries.
this is. I, how was AWP? You had some cryptic tweets that I saw come out. It was the one I almost commented on, and I was like, "Nah, I'm not going to do that publicly." I almost DM'd you
Oh my
about it
God, which
though,
one was that?
it was the one about
There were
something
so
about
many.
how like being like a lesbian or whatever, and like people expecting you to end up with a man or whatever, like when you're because you don't have an option or something. And I was like,
Uh,
"Oh, I know exactly the conversations you're having, like in a bar or something off site, after
Oh
the
my
reading or
goodness.
something. Someone said, "Oh well," like it comes up, and you're like, "That." You had another couple go. I mean, that's interesting because it is like sometimes it's a depressing place when you go to these
Mm.
conferences. But yeah, how was it? How was it? I don't want to bash it and all that.
So the tweet you brought up was actually not related to AWP, or if it was,
It
I
just
mean, I think it might have
tangentially, right? Yeah,
just tangentially, although I don't know, I might have had one or two such conversations like while drunk in some like offsite event, just because, but they happen so frequently that all of these instances just kind of like blur together in my head. Um, but overall, if I had to describe AWP in 2 words, I would say socially overwhelming
yeah,
because like you've been, right? Like so you know how the book fair is the center of the festival, like
yeah.
um
Though I haven't been
yeah, it's
since post COVID. Like I haven't been since COVID kind of changed it. So I don't know if that's
oh, I bet it's changed so
yeah,
much.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like so my friend and I we wanted to do like a completionist arc of every booth.
Like all
And they
1,500 of them. Yeah,
yeah. Yeah, and just like collect like a bookmark or a button or whatever merch they had on hand from each of them. And we actually did manage to do that, but and it was great chatting with everyone as well, but just yeah, very very socially overwhelming. Thank God for Adderall and coffee for getting me through those 3 days. I can only imagine how the people like staffing the booths felt. Um, but yeah, I kind of understand why people always tell MFA students to like kind of save it for the second year because like people were pitching to all of these like lit mags and presses, and I think that would have been easier if I had like something finished on hand. Um, what else? But yeah, just a huge blur of socializing. It
yeah,
was great to meet up with a lot of mutuals. Um, Also, they didn't really have that much in terms of free books this year. Like
yeah.
that was what I kept hearing from people who'd gone before, like free books, take advantage of the free books, like bring 2 extra suitcases. But lo and behold, I did not even like um fill up one suitcase. So, but overall, like yeah, it was fun. Like I feel like AWP looms way too large in the writerly imagination
Oh yeah,
out of proportion to how consequential it actually is, if that
yeah.
makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you and I were chatting about this in like DMs and stuff when we were setting this episode up and kind of talking back and forth about Mann, and it just so happened because like we had to reschedule. We originally scheduled this, and it happened to be on AWP weekend, and we were like, all right, well, let's
Mm.
reschedule, and then all that kind of stuff. But yeah, you were saying that, and I think that's true, and I wonder why that is because I think maybe it's because there's AWP is associated with the institutions, Association of Writers and Writing Programs, the kind of university backed programs and all that. So I don't know. There's like kind of like a anti-institution thing in the culture right now, and so people just view that as part of it. And I guess it is, but yeah, like it's really like I've heard that too. People are like, oh, and you can network. You can if you hustle. You can like I think you were saying going to all the booths and just getting like the free
Mhm.
bookmarks or whatever. That's honestly an underrated way to kind of try and network. Your face. You're introducing yourself. Your face is there. They know put a name to a face. Not that it's that consequential because of course the editors were going to change in most of these college journals the next year, right? Because the people graduate and move on. But like yeah, it's interesting how that works with AWP. It does. It's like this big thing, and everybody they'll write an article about it. They'll write like some big screed about how they don't or how it's terrible. It's like corporatized and like capitalist or something. And yeah, I'm always just like, you should go to it if you haven't been and just look around because it's overwhelming and stuff like that. Even when big crowds like that, you can feel isolated even. Uh, but yeah, my experience and like the last year I went in 2019, I was, editing one of the editors for the journal that we put out for the grad program. So I was at the booth, doing things, whatever. And I mean, it is awkward sometimes because you have people, like it's all these people kind of wandering around with their little tote bags, looking at the table, and you can say hi to them and they kind of scurry away. Like I'm rather extroverted when it comes to that kind of stuff. Like I'm not somebody that crumples in a social setting. So it's, I would be like smiling, handing out. They'd be like, "Oh, like come check out our McNeese review. You know, like look at what we got in here this year." And yeah, people like trying to avoid eye contact with you and stuff. It's like, so you have that, and then you have people that are friendly, but still, like, yeah, it's just it's worth going, hustling. Like you said, manuscripts. That's one thing where I will agree with people that like don't like the conference or whatever. Where the people are, this is as you mature as an artist, you start to realize this stuff. I guess where it's like you're just in it enough where people will say, "Oh, send me your manuscript," right? But like, that's just like a social thing to say, you know, like like they don't actually mean it necessarily, yeah, or they're not going to read it, or maybe they do intend to read it in the moment, you know, and then it just stuff piles up. But still, like, yeah, I had a couple friends where that happened. They're like, "Oh yeah, send me the manuscript," and yeah, nothing, not even a response or anything, even if they give you an email address. Yeah, so it's that too. I mean, it's rough out there for writers. That's why I just always want to know and ask that kind of stuff. And same reason I ask when writers come on, like, how do they make a living, all of that, because it's rough. And I think there's a lot of delusion. There's a lot of romanticism of like the old ways that like never actually really existed. Maybe in the 20th century, there was like a heyday of like, you could make a lot of money in publishing, but like that's over with now. Like, I don't know. So yeah, I'm fascinated by that. But also I wanted to ask you, as we went into this, Maggie, your German obsession. Your German fetish. Where does that come from? How did it start? And it was partly because we've been mutuals on Twitter for a while now. That's how I noticed it. And I was like, I want to do this book. And I was like, well, Maggie's like obsessed. Yeah. So where did that come from? How did that start? How did you get obsessed with Germany and German culture and all that?
That's always been a very difficult question to answer, to be honest, because I think it's very hard to like find the origin of like what spurs like an autistic hyperfixation. And I think for me it was like their insane and turbulent 20th century, because sometimes the worst times to live through are also the most fascinating to read about. Like obviously World War II looms large in our historical imagination. A childhood friend of mine actually had like one of those World War II obsessed boomer dads, which kind of led to us discovering movies like Downfall or Come and See or Das Boot, like a little bit too young.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also the Cold War as well. Like the Berlin Wall also looms very large in our imagination if you're from America. I mean, I always thought it was like so goofy that they would just like build a wall separating these two states to prevent people from escape. Like there's sort of a stern finality to it, but then you have like this little pocket of West Germany that is in West Berlin, and it's like right in the middle of the GDR, and like, oh, it's where all the artists and hippies live. Like I always just found that very fascinating. And I mean, I guess there's just so many other like surreal, unsettling, absurd anecdotes that kind of really stick with you from German history. Like I know another one that loomed large in my imagination as a teenager was like those images of stacks of worthless money like after World War One. And right now it's the meticulous, petty, creative surveillance methods of the GDR, which is the subject of my current novel. It was just kind of a situation where like learning about one thing led to the uncovering of another and so forth. And it actually felt very strange to visit Germany in 2019 because like it's like by then I'd read so much about the history that the actual place had this sort of air of apprehensive, sinister unreality to it. Like the whole country was a Potemkin village or something.
Yeah. I was going to ask, where did you grow up? I guess you're living. I didn't even introduce you. Yeah, we're here with Maggie Zhu. Is this how you say it, right, Maggie Zhu?
Yeah.
Zhu. Yeah. And we're here to talk about Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain. But I wanted to ask, like, what? I know you're living in Jersey now. Where did you grow up?
So I originally grew up in Connecticut and then lived in Boston for like most of my adulthood. And then I think sometime around like 2019, 2020, I kind of got it in my head like, oh, like I want to go to New York City.
Right.
So like I just applied to MFA programs in this area. And I think by then I had literally just learned what an MFA was.
Right.
And ended up in northern New Jersey, which I mean it's like close enough. We're like an hour from New York City. If the path is having a good day. But
I was going to ask, was it like the Connecticut that is like the suburbs of New York City, or like the Connecticut that was like more rural? Like,
It was a little more. It was like the suburbs outside Hartford. Like
Okay.
if you were to drive from New York City to where I'm from, it'd be like 2 or 3 hours, depending on traffic.
I was just asking because I didn't know if there was like a big German pop. I know there's like because like where I grew up in Baltimore, a big
Mm,
German enclave historically, and then I know like
mm.
parts of Chicago in the Midwest. There's these Wisconsin's particularly like huge kind of German settlements post kind of yeah, late 1800s when the huge migration waves were coming through. So I was just interested if that or it was literally just like a thing you discovered and just like enjoyed. Yeah, that's interesting. Interesting.
Right. That's what I've heard as well about like the Midwest. And I think even like there's a part of Texas where I think they still speak like a
Yeah.
form of German that the immigrants from like the 1800s would have spoken, which super fascinating. But I'm personally like very not very well traveled at all in the US, so I have
Yeah.
like very little contact with
That's worth it
like
too. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, road trips are great in the US to like just see things like that. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, it's interesting. I noticed that kind of stuff more when I moved away, from like my hometown growing up where it was all very kind of German, not even, it's a mix. I mean, but like there were strong like big German enclaves and then like yeah, like everybody was Catholic, like everybody in that city. Like it's like I mean not everybody, but the majority and stuff like that. So I'm always just
Hmm.
but yeah, Germany's one of those ones where I think like, you're right. World War II. Do you ever? This is kind of out of. I mean, Thomas Sowell, the economist. I remember reading his book. Um, uh, Several of his books. He mentions it all the time, but he talks. He has this great line where he talks about how the 13 years in the 20th century under the Third Reich's control, he says, kind of tarnished the German legacy, where he said if you go back to the 1700s, the 1600s, he's like, this was the epicenter of culture, music, art. Like, they were the artisans making beer and wine. They were the artisans. They were all the scholars. Like, they staffed all the universities in the world were mostly German scholars because it was just like this this birthplace of like the kind of, let's call it the more modern European tradition that we kind of romanticize as Americans, like we like love to romanticize quaint little towns and villages in France or Germany or something, and yeah, it was just when I read that for the first time, I was like, huh, that is interesting because yeah, as a millennial growing up, like boomer dad, yeah, that loved World War II and the Civil War and stuff, you only ever see it from that perspective in terms of like the post World War II order where and he just makes an interesting claim where he just said yeah it kind of really ruined the legacy of what Germany gave to the world and just their place in it. Yeah, so it is interesting how that affects it, and it's crazy too because like this book written post World War One but pre World War Two, so that's interesting too, 1924. But yeah, and German and stuff. So
Right.
you said you went to Germany?
I did in 2019 to
Okay,
visit a friend.
nice.
Yeah. But
Was this a weird online friend that you met, or
no, actually a childhood friend who was studying there.
oh, okay, even better.
Yeah,
Yeah,
in
yeah,
Karlsruhe. But yeah, with the Magic Mountain, I really kind of see what you're saying about the legacy of World War II kind of tarnishing like really kind of like I have like a response to like what you just said, but I'm like blanking on the words for it.
no worries. No,
Um,
it's podcast. We're gonna weave in and out. If it
yeah.
comes up 20, 40 an hour later, just bring it up. Yeah, it's no worries at all.
Mm,
But
sounds good. Sounds good. Um, but yeah, what was I'm trying to like think of the words. Um,
Germany's legacy and kind of the post World War II kind of stain on it. Like the Third Reich stain on
right.
it, and kind of clouding out like the philosophical history, the educational history. Like, I mean, everybody talks about
Mm,
Vienna and like yeah, the compositions that were coming out of there and like the Romantic period. Like yeah,
right. I feel like that's particularly clear with with this book because while reading The Magic Mountain, I'm just like, this is only a book that could have been written like in that interwar period between the world wars. Like, I mean, firstly, like this sort of mysticism and romanticism that you see here, I feel like that kind of really got thrown out. That's like the baby that got thrown out with the fascist bathwater, like after after World War II. And yeah, like Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I always like to start this off too. Yeah, so listeners, this was published originally in 1924. We both read the John E. Woods translation, which I think is like the most prevalent translation right now. If you like just go on Amazon and look for this book, which of course is linked below. But I like to start this off, Maggie, with kind of like, what is your history with Mann or this book or Mann in general, kind of? And of course, the German modernists in general too, since it's like a hobby of yours. Yeah.
So the only other Mann novel, or I guess novella, I should say in this case, that I'd read before The Magic Mountain was Death in Venice, which I actually don't really remember liking as much as The Magic Mountain, even though it touches on a lot of the same elements, like the lethargy of the bourgeois, the Apollonian versus the Dionysian. But I think it did it in a way that felt just a little too on the nose for me. Like, oh, you have this old German man prowling around Venice and lusting after this little Polish boy dying of poisoned strawberries. Actually, that sounds really cool now that I'm describing it to you. But then again, I did read it at 19, so it's very possible it just like lacked the taste or maturity to appreciate it. And now I want to revisit it again after reading this. But as for Mann himself, I think for whatever reason, I used to have this very unflattering image of him in my head that kind of stemmed from coming across something that he'd said about another writer whom I really loved at the time, Hans Fallada. I believe they're both of the same generation, but unlike Mann, Fallada remained in Nazi Germany, where he continued to write. He's most well known for Every Man Dies Alone, which is a novel about this couple that's in the resistance, and another book about this alcoholic man, which he wrote in code while he was locked in an asylum during the war. And I mean, both of those novels are great, and Fallada is a very interesting and complex figure in his own right. But what Mann had to say about him, and for writers like Fallada who were working in Nazi Germany in general, was, and I have this quote here because it's something that has to be experienced. It may be a superstitious belief, but in my eyes, any books which could be printed at all in Germany between 1933 and 1945 are worse than worthless, and not objects one wishes to touch. A stench of blood and shame attaches to them. They should all be pulped. And at the time that I read that years ago, I was like, oh my God, how could you say that about Hans Fallada, who wrote this amazing book while literally locked in an asylum in Nazi Germany? But I think over the years, I was able to develop like more empathy for Mann and where he was coming from, especially learning about Mann's own background and like his nationalism during World War I and the regret he probably felt about that, and a little more about like his life after he and his family fled the Nazis in the 1930s, where they settled in LA. But yeah, so that's my background with Mann, and once again, like, thank you for reaching out with this request, because I really enjoyed this book, and I mean, I would have gotten to it sooner or later probably, but I'm glad to have gotten to it sooner. So
yeah, absolutely. And my history with it is I hadn't read anything of Mann at all, but this is one of those books that is constantly mentioned, especially when you're in MFA, graduate school, you know, PhD, master's level, studying literature and writing. It's talked about, it's referenced, it's mentioned in essays constantly, but it's never like assigned, probably because it's such a big, dense book with all this philosophy and stuff that you could do an entire course on it if you wanted to, like a lot of people do with Joyce novels or something like that, like Ulysses, take an entire course on it. You could do something like that with The Magic Mountain. But and recently in starting this podcast where I'm always looking for books that I'm like, I know I'm supposed to read, right? But with never, for whatever reason, going through, you know, a decade of higher education, never was assigned it, never forced to read it in that way, like you are with so many other books. And so I was like, man, I've always wanted to do this one. It's been on my list to do for the podcast. But then when I'm always searching for people, I'm always just like, all right, I want to pick something that like the guest wants and is like interested in and wants to talk about for hours on a fucking podcast. So yeah, and I was like, okay, well, this like modernist, like German translated masterpiece. I was like, who better than Maggie when I was thinking of it? So yeah.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that.
And I think your point about Mann like fleeing Germany too, and I think like Albert Einstein said similar things. Like there were a lot of the intellectual class that fled Germany during the Third Reich takeover. There's a lot of resentment for like destroying that legacy, like we mentioned at the beginning, of like
Right,
the
absolutely.
thousands of years of Germany being at the peak of civilization, like innovating, making the best instruments and things, like doing the great like orchestral compositions. So they were very resentful of that, because it's something you don't think about. Obviously everyone thinks about the fascism and the death and the bombs and the war and like people dying, but like the bourgeois and like the intellectuals were offended by like the tainting of the legacy, like the intellectual legacy and stuff, and they were like kind of very, I mean, I imagine that is hurtful. I mean, it's almost something like I do feel a little bit now in terms of bashing the American legacy or the British legacy, or just like the kind of Western legacy in literature and stuff like that, where it's just too easy to just start bashing things because of, a 10-year period in history or a 50-year period in history or whatever we want to point to and say, oh, well, that means that it was all bad. And I'm like, well, no, actually, I have resentment for that. So like, it does kind of make me feel what Mann or somebody was feeling in that time. And I mean, shit, I've said on this podcast all the time, like the last like 20 years of literature has been kind of stagnant. Like I wouldn't say that you could pulp all the books that were written during this last 25 years, but I'm definitely feel a little bit of what he's saying there. Yeah. And my next question is always, how did it read for you, Maggie? How did it read?
Oh my goodness. So firstly, I just wanted to say this book is 850 pages and it took me 3 months personally. Wait, how long did it take you?
About 3 weeks, yeah. But it was my sole dedication. Like it was my sole, like I wasn't reading anything else. I was, and like whatever I had free time, I was doing it. I'm not a fast reader. I'm actually kind of a slow reader. But maybe that's just compared to the people I know. Like my wife knows how to speed read, and like if we're like reading something together, like a contract or something, she's like ready to turn the page, and I'm like, "How are you done already?" I'm like a paragraph into this. Like I'm like, "No, we can't turn the page yet." Something like that. So I'm a slow reader. Yeah, but this is one it's hefty. Yeah. But yeah,
Right.
go on, please. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I'm a very slow reader as well. And I think, I mean, I had like a lot of other readings for like grad school that I was doing in the midst of this. And I mean, I think part of that slowness is because I like to read aloud in order to pay attention to the prose. And this book in particular was one that demanded such close attention. And while reading it, I was also thinking like, oh my God, how are we even supposed to discuss this? Because firstly, like once 3 months has passed, the beginning of the book starts to become a distant memory in the way that Hans Cast almost said Falaga, Hans Castorp entering the asylum probably becomes a distant memory for himself at the end. This is a book that really kind of messes with your sense of time on many levels. And also, I think part of that difficulty was, how do we even describe a novel like this? I mean, many terms came to mind for me, like 19th century realist novel, Bildungsroman, novel of ideas, even anti-war novel. I was curious how it read for you.
Yeah, for me, the first 100 pages or so, which kind of covers his first day and a half, I was flying through. Like I probably read that in like 2 sittings or something, just flying through it. There were lulls, mainly when it's describing his like inner turmoil and kind of the research sections. I do want to talk about that when he's like doing this kind of amateur research.
Right.
And it's described in great detail. You do slow down when you're like, but the parts where there is that philosophical banter and like the dialogue, like I was absolutely enthralled. Like I was gripped by like the sections of the book that were just like those endless kind of intellectual philosophical banter. And I mean, maybe that's just me, but yeah, it's surprising how well this reads. And that's why I mentioned at the beginning, kind of the translation. Like I was surprised at how good this was. Maybe it's just because German translates easier to English. I don't know. I'm not an expert on that, listener. Somebody leave it in the comments. But like, it's like, it just reads like it reads unlike a lot of other translations that have a little kind of like, it's almost stilted when you read a couple translations. Yeah, it's kind of great. The style, the descriptions, these long dialogues. But yeah, I the descriptions.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you and I. No, sorry. Please go on. Please go
Oh,
on.
no worries. Anyways, absolutely. I like what you mentioned about the debates because I really enjoyed those parts too. And when I've been describing this book to people in my life while reading it, I'm like, oh, there's these two crazy guys like Set and Brady and NAFTA, and they go on for 20 pages, like really tearing into each other. Like these are two men who would have loved Twitter, but they wouldn't have been able to fit their rants within 180 characters.
Yeah.
And then people hear that and they're like, oh my God, that's so tedious. And I'm like, oh, it's actually really fun. They're so witty. Like, I wish I could argue like they do.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. I was going to say the descriptions are, I mean, some of these descriptions, especially those first 100 pages when he's coming in and all the kind of characters in the sanatorium are being described, I just couldn't get over how impeccable they are. And you and I were kind of messaging back and forth about this too, just kind of the descriptions, the way these people are described, the cracks of a muffin, her eyes are like the cracks in a muffin, like just... Absolutely. And they're not overdone either. Like you would think, oh, this kind of indulgent, the kind of modernist style prose, it's not overdone. It's fantastic, thrilling, like, but there are some slower parts mixed in there. So, I understand. And again, this, like we already said, this is a huge, dense book. I mean, even this, like, yeah, my version is like just over 700 pages the way they printed it in this. And like, there's just so much per page, like this text, it's like Bible text. There's like, it's like everything close together, everything like, yeah, like 1,000 words fit onto a single page, like shrunk down. So it does take a while to read through, but it is kind of like, maybe we should talk about that too. This kind of like, the way time is described, because like you mentioned it already, like time, it almost starts every new section when like there's kind of this reflection of time, and not just from the main character like Hans Castorp's perspective, from the writer's perspective, even like Mann's perspective, or the reader's perspective. It's like all tied in terms of, oh, what is time really? I mean, well, it becomes a blur, and there's all these different philosophical things that they talk about. How do you measure time? What's it for? Is it just some dreamlike thing? And eventually it does become this kind of dreamlike thing for the main character, Hans, in this. But so you kind of feel the time melding away too, and then you're kind of toiling at this stuff. But yeah, I mean,
right.
There was an insufferable foreword in mine. I don't know if Mann wrote it or not.
Oh, the one that starts with the story of Hans Castorp that we intend to tell here?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I wasn't sure what to make of that. Like, I mean, what to make of this disembodied narrator, because we get that at the end too, when we see our dear Hans Castorp, our life's problem child in the trenches. But what was I gonna say? But yeah, I guess like what stood out to me about this novel's use of time is the fact that I think for about the first 100 pages, that just spans Hans Castorp's first day at the sanatorium, and then the first week spans like 200 pages. And I mean, you read in the blurb like he's going to be there for 7 years, and it's like, oh well, it really makes you wonder how he's going to pace out those 7 years at the time. But I think it really kind of replicates perhaps like that psychological experience of going to a place such as the sanatorium. And there was a quote near the beginning, I believe it's something Joachim said, where the smallest unit of measurement for time in the sanatorium is like a month. But yeah, like I guess the reason why it made sense for the first few weeks to span so many pages was you really kind of get to see Hans Castorp like becoming acclimated to the strange idiosyncratic ways of this new space.
Right.
And then after that, time sort of melts away. I mean, I guess like there's a lot of spaces where I guess time would pass that way. I think in particular of like a psych ward or like a spa. Because while reading this book, I was also reading Committed by Suzanne Scanlon, which is about like the 2 years that she spent in a psych ward. And she also kind of touches on the way that all of the days seemed to blend together, and it didn't really feel like 2 years. It felt like much shorter than that. And I also read part of this book in a Korean spa in like northern New Jersey, which which also has that same sort of slipperiness of time. Like I think my friend and I spent like 9 hours there, but it just felt like 1 hour to me,
Right.
which was so weird. To read this book there, I highly recommend the experience. And I make those comparisons mostly because the environment of the sanatorium kind of strikes me as somewhere between like a spa and a mental institution. I mean, it's kind of like this, like very, it's like a hermetic chamber, like a sensory deprivation tank of the spirit. Um,
Yeah.
and um,
No, I mean that it's 100% like that. It's like this. Yeah, I mean, we joked when we were talking about this, like kind of like grad school. It almost feels like grad school, where like you're there and all of a sudden it's over, and you're like, oh, I guess I went through this for a few years. I mean, but that, and I think even like almost like a casino too in terms of time. Like, I mean, I live in Vegas, so there's like this kind of like when you're in a casino, it's all by design, but it's like there are no clocks on the wall. Like they don't want you to know what time it is. The lighting is a certain way, so you don't know whether it's 1 a.m, 4 a.m, or literally like 8 a.m. in the 9 a.m. ready, 10 a.m. ready to go. The day is going on that you can literally just lose time. And I think that's true too. Like, I mean, even in like the very beginning there's kind of like, as he's getting acclimated, I called it in my notes kind of like almost like a cult like behavior, the quote that when he's talking to his cousin, he's just saying like, it would not have taken much for Hans Kostorp to be seized by another fit of laughter. What? You lie out on your balcony, rain or shine, night or day? He asked, his voice wavering on the edge. Yes, it's in the rules, from 8 till 10. But come on, let's have a look at your room and you can wash up. Like, it just, these kind of strangeness, right? Like the scheduling, like even there, they don't even really know what time it is. And he kind of mentions this throughout, and it gets worse and worse as you keep reading. But like they know the time by the dinner bells, or like the bells of like the rest cure or whatever. Like the whole institution is like designed around this thing that you have to kind of be absorbed in. And that's something I think we should touch on in terms of themes that like you kind of, and you see it in Hans Kostorp too, where he starts to mimic the people he's around because he's in this like kind of sealed off box and this like, and yeah, it's almost like a resort spa or something, at least what we would call resort spas now. But I guess that was common. I mean, I'm not a history expert or anything, or buff even, but like from what I understand at that time period, this was still very much a thing. Like, especially out here in Nevada, there's like a big history of people coming out to like northern Nevada and even Las Vegas Springs before it all kind of dried up at this time period, where it was basically like a resort, like, yeah, rest cure, literally. Like you rich people would take the train out and they would stay in the mountains for a week or whatever in like northern Nevada, and like, oh, the air and the water, the springs or something are supposed to be rejuvenating. This was still very much considered like the peak of healthcare at the time. So I don't know if that was just like a more common thing. And then like, I don't know enough about Mann either. Did he ever go to something like this? Do you know that? Or
So I'm not a huge expert on like the history of sanatoriums either, but I did read that Mann's wife, Katya, spent like I think a couple months in a sanatorium, and he went to visit her there, and that was one of the geneses for this novel. And while researching for this episode, I did come across a website that kind of like documented like the practices of the rest cure, and it was like, oh, how we can implement this practice in our daily lives. And it did pull a lot of quotes from this book for to describe like the experience of it. So I guess there are still practitioners of this particular type of rest cure described in the book. And I also really like your comparison to like the cult and the casino, because there really is a feel to Hans's first day in the sanatorium that it's almost as if he is being inculcated into a cult and like learning its practices, like oh, here's how you fold the blankets, like and just like kind of getting accustomed to their ways. And I think at one point he stops keeping a calendar, so he literally has no idea of how much time is passing by him, and he stops like paying attention to the newspapers. And something about the weather up in the Alps as well really kind of distorts his sense of the seasons because there are no seasons up there.
Right.
It's like constant winter. Sometimes it snows in the summer, sometimes it's warm in the winter. Yeah, just there's really nothing that kind of gives an idea of like the quantification of time. And I was also very intrigued by the technology mentioned um, that is mentioned in this book because I think you get like the film and the X-ray, and I mean these technologies are so mundane to us, but they're still new to the characters, and I think Mann describes them interacting with this technology in a way that kind of really makes you see like how they distort the viewer's sense of time in a way that we don't really think about because we're so accustomed to it. Like for the film aspect, like at one point the sanatorium, I think it acquires I'm not sure what it's called, like a projector or Nickelodeon, like one of
Right.
those things that show like the short jittery early films that came before cinema as we know it, and like the patients aren't sure if they should clap at the end as they would while attending a play. And I really love this line in particular about how they perceive this film that they're seeing for the first time. The actors who had been cast in the play they had just seen had long since been scattered to the winds. They had watched only phantoms, whose deeds had been reduced to a million photographs brought into focus for the briefest of moments. Once the illusion was over, there was something repulsive about the crowd's nerveless silence, hands laid impotent before the void. And then there's like a scene in the film where a Moroccan woman like waves to the camera, and then people just kind of like stare in confusion because like they're they're not sure if they should like wave back, and like it's just like you can see like the surreal confusion of people interacting with that. And then the X-ray as well, like that scene stood out as well because the way he describes the X-ray is so scary.
Yeah.
Like if you wanted to scare a child, because it makes it sound like Hans Castorp and his cousin are getting electrocuted to death or something. I mean, there's a lot of innuendos for X-ray here. Like I think Dr. Behrens calls it a parlor thunderstorm. And then when Hans Castorp is looking at his own X-ray, it's a really jarring experience to see his bones because he is struck by the feeling that this is something he was never supposed to see until death. And I think the exact line is he saw his own grave, and for the first time in his life, he understood that he would die.
Yeah. Have you ever had an X-ray of anything, or in like the
Many
modern?
times.
Yeah, yeah. Like it's
Yeah.
even kind of scary even in the modern era, like with modern
Mm.
medicine. Because you're in that room by yourself, and then you start hearing the machine click, and then like you're just kind of like
Mm.
waiting for direction, and they have like those like lead lined vests or whatever they put all over you, and you're like and then I guess back then you're just getting blasted with radiation. Like no wonder all these people aren't healing. They're like giving them radiation sickness from like all these X-rays they're taking of them. That and I mean,
Absolutely.
but you see it almost with Hans Castorp, like when he's first getting there, like he's a little bit skeptical. He's not that skeptical, but he's a little bit, oh, this is goofy. You know, you guys lay out on the balcony in the rain, like in the snow. That's crazy. But he almost wants to be accepted by it. He wants to be a part of this. Like he starts to kind of wants to be a member of it, even though he's resistant to it for maybe like the first week, and then he kind of is like, I want to be a part of this world, this institution almost. And we could compare this to anything. I think your comparison to kind of the Twitter discourse is apt. It's on there because of course in this type of discourse, especially in kind of the modern era online, I mean, people are philosophizing every day about the point of some bill or the point of some cultural thing or the aesthetics of some fucking Coke ad or whatever. Like, I mean, it literally is just constant opining intellectually, even if it leads you to dead ends and stuff. Like, people just like to do that. And I don't know. I mean, you almost, and even when you're hanging in online, like when you first come into like this, especially something like Twitter where this is own language, its own way of communicating, which is different from some of the other social media sites. Like, and like you do start to almost embody it. Like you hear even on podcasts people speak like that or make the jokes like that. Like you become a part of this kind of institution, the mannerisms, the way of speaking, the way of analyzing things. I don't know. I mean, you kind of, one, it's very human, right? You can't resist that entirely. I mean, it's very difficult to, like, you know, everyone's, oh, be your own person. Well, the reason people say that is because that's pretty hard to do. I mean, like, we're just animals that are, you know, influenced by everything around us, everything we consume, the institutions that we're in, like how people behave. Or like when you start working a job, like I remember I worked this job only for a little while because I couldn't stand it. But when I was right out of grad school and I got this job in marketing, you know, writing slop for online, you know, web pages and stuff that are like those. I don't even know if they still do it, but like back then they called it link building, where you're just writing fake articles that were paid for by a company to like promote their links in the SEO stuff. Of course, that's all changed because the algorithms and the search engines have changed. But yeah, and I just remember they'd wear like basketball shorts to work and shit. And, you know, whatever, like, but I was just not that person. I've never been that person. Like, I'm like an upper middle class prep school boy. Like, you know, like I had to wear a tie to high school like every day and stuff like that. And it just, and I eventually I found myself even like, be like, oh, why am I even bothering getting dressed? I'll just wear like basketball shorts like everybody else, you know, like, and I remember like, I did that one day and everybody was like shocked that I wore like basketball shorts or whatever instead of my usual like kind of outfit or whatever. And I would just remember like, oh, I'm succumbing to this. And I'm like, and I could feel it. Like it was affecting how I dressed myself for work and like all of that. Like, I don't know, just an example that I'm thinking of like, this is all like, it's very real. Like you come into a place and you want to be accepted by it, of course. But like you just start to have these things rub off on you, like how seriously Joachim, was taking all like the temperature checks and like the rest cure, to where Hans Kostorp was like, oh, well, I'm just visiting, I don't need to do any of that. But then he becomes quickly obsessed with it, monitoring his temperature and monitoring like making sure he does his rest cure and buying himself things to make the rest cure more enjoyable, like the fur-lined sleeping bag or whatever. I don't know. I mean, that's just so interesting how that happens. And I think underrated in terms of like this whole novel is essentially about that. Like if we were to be crude and sum it up in that, I mean, it's about much more than that, listeners. But like, yeah, like this kind of very human, you're almost consumed by where you are, you know. And this has been a theme on the podcast. We've talked about this, I think, from the very first episode. We talk about Edith Wharton, kind of like victims is not the best word, but kind of like a victim of circumstance. You're kind of a victim of where you are. Like there's some things out of your control that like you just kind of get absorbed into. And Hans Kostorp's like a character that's almost like we see that happen throughout the course of the novel. Like the story of the novel is essentially him becoming a part of the institution like all the other people that are there. I don't know. I mean, it's endlessly, I mean, there's so many ways we could approach this. I was thinking themes like dreams, culture of illness, all that stuff. You know, kind of like the more you obsess over illness, the more sick you become. I think that's very apt in our culture right now. I mean, in terms of people self-diagnosing, being obsessed with their little quirks and their illnesses and things like that. The good versus evil, even like, I mean, like there's always like the kind of the ideas of Satan, the ideas of temptation. I mean, there's just so much. I mean, this novel is so rich with all of that. I mean, I don't know. I mean, smoking is vice. Like, sorry, please go on. I was ranting.
Oh, no worries. I think it's interesting how the disembodied narrator we see at the beginning and the end sort of goes through great pains to tell us, oh, he's such a perfectly ordinary young man, Hans Castorp, almost as if to say, this could be any of you. And I suppose that was true, especially because at the end when he kind of joins like that faceless mass of soldiers in the trench, like we get that very brief flash of his face under the helmet before he disappears back into the commotion of war. And yeah, he is a character that I guess kind of emphasizes like how little agency we have, even if we like to think otherwise,
Right.
and the way that it's so easy for people to adapt to their circumstances. Because he really does kind of succumb to the sanatorium after initially finding its ways farcical. Like he just like laughs at all the practices, but then he's actually doing them eventually. And it kind of shows in like his habits as well. Like I think he exchanges like the Maria Mancini cigars for like a more local brand instead of having them like shipped to him from Germany. And one thing I found really interesting was the way that the people in the sanatorium kind of like seem to yearn for illness and like exaggerate it in order to stay longer. And that seemed to pair quite well with Hans Castorp's temperament because he's someone who for whom like death and illness is very beautified in his mind. I mean, firstly, the specter of death just looms over his life. Like he's literally an orphan, and one of the first scenes is of him looking at his grandfather in the coffin, wearing that Spanish ruff that makes him look very regal. And I think it literally described his dead body as like his true and authentic form. And that first conversation with Settembrini as well, where he tries to like argue that illness ennobles, and then Settembrini is like, no, like it degrades the human spirit. Like, yeah, I was curious what you made of that.
Yes, I wanted to talk about that as well because when Settembrini is introduced, he's introduced as this kind of intellectual force, this charismatic guy, like this kind of like classic intellectual. His family has a long history of being these kind of like men of letters and stuff like that, revolutionaries even. And yeah, the idea of art as Satan, right, was the first thing that I think is one of the first things he says when he meets Hans for the first time. What is it? Page 59 in mine. I marked it with all this stuff. And I wanted your take on that too. Like, what we think of it. I'll read it real quick. Where they're talking, right? My good sir, Settembrini replied, there is much here that has a medieval ring to it, as you have chosen to express it. I, for my part, am convinced that he made this fossil the chief supervisor of his palace of horrors simply out of a sense of artistic style. He is, after all, an artist. You did not know that? He paints in oils, and why not? It is not forbidden, you know. Everyone is free to do as he chooses. Fra Adriatica tells anyone who will listen, and others as well, that toward the middle of the 13th century, she herself surely must have first seen the light of the world shortly after. This kind of like, and then like he takes it almost as like a sarcasm thing, right? Like kind of like Satan, devil as artist in literature, like. What am I saying here? Because I was like, that wasn't it. I'm inexperienced in that area, but find myself in a rather good company in that lack of experience. Oh, he's talking about smoking. So I was reading the wrong section here. That's what I was that. Oh, okay. But basically, he equates like art to Satan, right?
Mm-hmm.
Name it. There's
Particularly music, it seems.
Yes, music and art and Satan. And yeah, he calls him sarcastic for saying that, and he's like, sarcastic, you mean malicious? Yes, I am a little malicious. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. What do we think about that in terms of like art being evil or like this kind of degradation? Music is a degradation, as Settembrini would say. And I don't know if we thought about that with Mann or anything like that. In terms of, I don't know, he almost considers it like kind of like a form of brainwashing or something. Which again reminds us of Twitter discourse, right? Everybody's obsessed with like MK Ultra, and then kind of the CIA is kind of funding like art stuff in like the 60s or whatever. Everybody's obsessed with that. I don't know. What do we take of that in terms of art being evil or like akin to Satan, kind of temptation, all of that, like Settembrini argues?
I found it very intriguing. I mean, I think I sort of grafted the Apollonian versus Dionysian dichotomy onto Nafta and Settembrini, where like Settembrini embodies the Apollonian, and NAFTA embodies the Dionysian, which this was initially something that Nietzsche talked about in The Birth of Tragedy, where I believe like Apollonian was more about like order, rationality, and then Dionysian was about like the irrational, the medieval, like and I think he posits music as the most Dionysian form of art, which I think is something you really see in Thomas Mann's work. I mean, one of his other novels, Dr. Faustus, is about a musician that like makes a deal with the devil as like a metaphor for fascism. And even just like the lines about music in this novel too. I mean, I don't know if you remember the scene where Hans Castorp is looking at that dead Austrian horseman, the one that had the horrible cough that left an impression on him on his first day. And he says the corpse is wearing an expression much like the one he usually wore when listening to music. There's a kind of equation of music with death, with the Dionysian, and it's something that Hans Castorp seems to crave, or something that is beautified in his mind, at least.
Yeah, that, and like one thing I was I was pretty like, I had a soft spot for Settembrini and like his kind of like arrogance and all of that, like, and mainly because of the way he's set up with this, like when his first meeting and they talk about all this stuff and he's kind of bombarding, almost like pelting Hans Castorp with all of these, let's use today's words, hot takes, right, about like about art and literature and music and but I the one thing he says in that section where he first meets him is towards the end of it, page 62 in my version, listeners, but still he says, he's talking to Hans and he says, "That's pure sluggishness," the Italian replied. "Form opinions. That's why nature gave you eyes and reason." And that might be my most favorite line in the entire novel, mostly because I have been preaching that for my entire existence, but I also think that that's all of art, right? Like everything about art and literature, well, of course we can just enjoy it and you can just read it and get something pleasurable out of it. But my favorite line, "Form opinions," and it's literally just that with an exclamation point. Form opinions, and he's almost like shouting at Hans Castorp about it. Like kind of one of those, what do you think? Like you taste and judgment, like form your opinion about something. And I don't know, because I feel like that's probably the most valuable advice that Hans Castorp gets throughout this whole thing, and he gets it like in the first 60-some pages from this guy who he kind of wavers back and forth on, although you can tell he's kind of smitten by him too. Like he's kind of like obsessed with him and he's thinking about him constantly, to the point when you get further in the novel, he kind of already knows what he's going to say, objections to certain things. And it is kind of a way of learning, studying, all of that. But I love that attitude. I love that. But so your thoughts, form opinions. What are your thoughts on that? Form opinions. That's why nature gave you eyes and reason.
I feel like that kind of what made me see the novel as like a Bildungsroman in a way. Like, I mean, Hans Castorp, he's this sort of naive, inexperienced bourgeois young man at the beginning, and he encounters all of these pedagogical figures in the sanatorium, of which Settembrini seems to be the most prominent one, but is only one of them. I mean, I think it's very interesting the way that he oh my God, sorry, I'm stuttering again.
It almost changes his whole personality. Like throughout the course of the novel, he changes his whole personality and the way he thinks based around these kind of, pedagogical figures that he encounters at the sanatorium. And he really you can tell he enjoys it. Like it's pleasurable. It's kind of this endless, bourgeois contemplation, laying on the couch, in the library or the study, thinking and reading, writing. Yeah, very interesting. And it's viewed as like an impressive feat, like he's impressed by these people's intellect. He's impressed by Settembrini and all of them, like they're back and forth. And I want to get to that big kind of scene in the flatlands where the big thing about religion back and forth there. Just because, you pointed this out when we were talking, just how much it resembles our modern era, and it's always just like, because we like to think that we progress past all these things or whatever, we're uniquely kind of enlightened in our current time, but then you read something from 100 years ago, and it just shows you that actually we're doing the same conversations, we're still in the same thing, it's not changed, we just think it has. But Madame Chauchat,
Mhm.
Clavedia, what do you think of her? What do you make of her as a character? Because it's like she becomes the point of his focus at a certain point, and I want to talk about that too, the kind of like being in love or whatever. But just like her initially, like what are our impressions of her?
Firstly, I was struck by Thomas Mann's Slavophilia because in Death in Venice, the old man lusts after a little Polish boy. Now this young German man is lusting after an older Russian woman. So I found that kind of um, like to be an absurd sort of rhyme. But I guess I kind of saw his attraction to her as sort of his integration into the sanatorium or a hint at his future integration. I mean, like once he falls in love, it's all over. He's never getting out. Like that, like that was and I think that was the reason why he like even stayed in the one of the reasons why he even stayed in the sanatorium that long, because there was a part where like Madame Cauchat leaves and she's like, "Oh, I'll be back," but she comes back like I think years later, and he just like he's been waiting for her this whole time, and that seemed to be confirmed a little later when Hans Castorp's when his relative James Teenapple visits him, and I believe he became attracted to like Frau Stur or one of the other women in the sanatorium, but then he flees a couple days later before that could come to fruition. But yeah, what did you think of Madame Cauchat?
I was always intrigued because I'm always a sucker for like the sensitive young man being obsessed with a woman in fiction and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And I like that she becomes this kind of, the rumors about her start to fill his mind and he obsesses over it. He wants to meet her. And then we spend like 100 pages of him trying to orchestrate these kind of meet cutes with her, like in the sanatorium. Which again, and then when we get to the Mardi Gras ball where they actually interact. But yeah, I thought it was interesting that she was described as so careless. There's this kind of aloof, upper class woman that slams doors when she comes through and is always late to things, and kind of her carelessness is a huge attraction for him. Especially,
Right.
No, please go on.
Okay. It almost kind of draws into relief how repressed Hans Castorp is.
Yes.
Like she's the one to draw that out of him.
Yeah. There is something about that too, where like, I don't know. I mean, the carelessness, the air about that woman that intoxicates him, and I think that's one. It's a trope in literature. I mean, there's great novels written about that sort of thing, but it's such a romantic sense of it too. And yeah, like he keeping her X-ray when they exchange the X-rays, and he like treasures it. He keeps it with him, and he looks at it, and he almost gets weird with it, where he's like, this is her insides. Like he's like, I'm seeing her wholly inside and out. Like I'm not just obsessing over the outer beauty, I'm obsessing over this internal organs that are like on this slide and her bones and all that, the soft spot on the lungs.
It was the 19th century version of exchanging nudes. That was what it felt like to me.
Yeah. Or like giving your pin or your Letterman jacket or something. But yeah, that is crazy. And then like, I mean, I was just interested in that because I feel like her being like, because every classic novel, like you have to have some type of trope like this. Not even a trope, like just kind of a love, not even affair, because they barely touch each other. Like in this like stuff, he's just obsessed.
Speak in French.
Yeah, they're just obsessed with. He's just obsessed with it, and then she kind of likes the attention.
Yeah.
But that's and then she's gonna keep coming back up, listeners, because like she is like such a part of his time there at the institution. Like Maggie said, he even stays there longer because he's waiting for her to come back. Dreams as a theme. What do we think of that? Especially like kind of dreams become one of the obsessions he has for a little while at least. Where he would there's hundreds of pages really dedicated to him having these elaborate dreams, and he reflects on them constantly. Dreams of getting out of the institution, dreams of staying there, like all of this. I don't know, what do we make of that in terms of like dreams as a theme in this. And I think that has to do with time too, because that dreams are always kind of like a timeless place, like it's devoid of space and time. They're a little confusing, things get overlapped, and then you're kind of in this weird other space where nothing seems real. When you're asleep, time seems much different. So I think that's obviously intentional, but it's also just great for fiction too, to like have some dream scenes or whatever. But especially considering like it's interesting how kind of thrilling some parts of this novel were, where they're literally just sitting around this big old castle like structure, and like not a lot is going on. So they're going to dinners and their meals and then sitting on their balcony, but like you're getting all this internal world that I don't know, just kind of ties it all up. And institutions, the rules and customs of institutions, we already kind of talked about that. Sorry, I'm going through my notes. Illness, curing illness is a theme, and kind of an obsession too, because obviously everybody goes there to be cured of something. That's the whole point of it. And this is where I keep coming back to my boy Settembrini here, where he says, those two are your words. In that case, no. Illness is definitely not elegant, and certainly not venerable. Such a view is itself a sickness, or leads to it. Perhaps I can best arouse your abhorrence of that idea by telling you that it is outdated and ugly. It comes from an era of superstitious contrition, when the idea of humanity was deemed and distorted into a caricature, a fearful era, when harmony and health were considered suspicious and devilish, whereas infirmity in those days was as good as a passport to heaven. And I think this is another one of those things where I think it overlaps with the kind of discourse that everybody has online and stuff today too, where this idea of infirmity in those days was as good as a passport to heaven definitely made me think identity politics. But I think even more so, this kind of take on illness as a way into heaven made me think of identity politics. It made me think of kind of I guess everybody uses the word victimology or something, like victim blaming or seeing themselves as some type of victim or whatever. But like, illness is definitely not elegant and certainly not venerable. Such a view in itself is a sickness. And I was just so struck by that, where I was like, and this is obviously we're philosophizing now, and the character is philosophizing about this, and kind of Hans is taken aback by this kind of blunt statement, this kind of formed opinion about illness and how it's actually a burden and not something to be happy about. I don't know. I mean, what do you make of that? What do you make of that?
So regarding illness, there were several times in the novel where I wondered, are these characters actually sick, or are they
Right.
like is it sick? Is it physical sickness, as in tuberculosis, or are they like depressed? But I guess I kind of saw illness beyond its mere literal definition, in that it is the pretext that allows these people, particularly Hans Castorp, to sit in the sanatorium, and just think and daydream. Just gives them permission to do this thing that their ordinary lives would not permit them to do. I always say, like, reading this book makes me understand why people liked My Year of Rest and Relaxation. Like,
Did you not like
I mean,
that?
not really. That's another conversation.
I'm interested. Yeah.
Because, I mean, reading this book, all I could, at points, I found myself wishing I could spend 7 years in a sanatorium just reading and learning. I mean, it's really no surprise that Hans Castorp dives so deeply into all these like scientific books about like medicine and nature, because what else is he going to do? And I was very struck by something that he said near the middle. Actually, I only feel really healthy when I am doing nothing at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, like there's a way in which illness and health becomes kind of inverted in the sanatorium, where illness is health. It is a measure of something positive. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, there is this kind of maybe a good way to describe it is the glorification of illness. Oh, I have ADD. Oh, I'm autistic. Oh, I'm whatever it is. Like, oh, I'm cursed to even something as simple as, oh, I'm a white guy or something. Like, people would say that as if it's some type of affliction or something. Well, you have to give me a little bit of leadway here. I'm too stupid to understand, or whatever it is, like kind of like this idea that you're sick or like something's wrong with you, and how it that is a huge theme too, how it breeds more of that. Like you're constantly breeding more illness when you're obsessing over it, or some ailment, or some minor thing that's wrong with you, or you view as wrong with you, or whatever it is. But yeah, that's always interesting. But I am curious about you. You didn't like My Year of Rest and Relaxation, but you had the comparison struck you in terms of reading this. 'Cause
Right.
we have covered that on the pod. Yeah. What struck you about it?
Right. So firstly, I just wanted to say to that, I feel like illness kind of gives one like a concrete identity, which I
Yes.
could see being really appealing. And I guess like with My Year of Rest and Relaxation, there was the fact that it's been a while since I read it, but the fact that she stays in her apartment for the whole year, this like sealed hermetic chamber,
Yeah.
I think that element reminded me of the Magic Mountain. The only difference is that she's not developing her mind. She's just like eating junk food and watching TV the whole day. Um, but yeah, I was curious what you made of the ending with Hans Castorp ending up in the war, because there was something so tragic about the way it was described. I mean, obviously not just the fact that he's I guess I was kind of curious what you made of that, because there's a way in which the last 100 pages kind of, you can feel like disaster accumulating on the horizon. That starts with like that fist fight that breaks out at the sanatorium, and then Nafta like killing himself in front of Set and Breedy, changing the course of everyone's lives forever. But there was, I guess like earlier when I described this novel as an anti-war novel, is precisely the fact that you don't even see the war until the last like 10 pages or so. Like you spend all this time with Hans Castorp, watching him develop intellectually and spiritually, just kind of really come into his own as a person, I suppose, only to have this possibility of just like a bullet like taking that all away. That felt very impactful in particular. Yeah.
It's interesting too, because I've been thinking about this more too as you read these kind of old novels from the wars and stuff. Again, the wars that we even talked about that loom so large in the culture. Yeah, it's interesting how, I don't know, with anti-war novels and war, there's something about anti-war novels where they're anti the parts you can see about war, like the destruction, the death, the kind of misery, the leveling of cities or whatever, ancient cities. And then there's like this kind of what causes it for, is it for something? And I guess in Hans Castorp's case, it's clearly not something that he believes in, and then you're kind of dying for something you don't believe in, and that's kind of a huge tragedy. Maybe, and I think you're right, there is like an inevitability about him going to war and being lost in that, because now it's a new institution, new customs and rules, and all the ones he spent 7 years learning at the sanatorium are not helping him in that situation. So it's like this kind of brand new experience in the same way. It's almost starting over again, but even with higher stakes, because you're in the middle of a gunfight. There's trenches and things like that going into the war. Especially, I guess, World War One was big because it was the first like machine gun war where like the death was just catastrophic because we could fire thousands of rounds in a minute or whatever, or just tear something up, tear up an entire line. But yeah, I mean, that's crazy. I mean,
it's incredibly sorry, what's that?
No, go, please. Please.
Sorry, we can edit this part out, but but yeah, it's incredibly jarring, the transition from the tranquility and non-existence of the sanatorium to the sudden explosion of violence that we see in the war. Like, I mean, earlier I mentioned that I read this book over 3 months. I spent 3 months with this character, this precious young lad, or problem child of life, who seems to be just about the last thing from a military man, unlike like the irony of him going instead of Joachim, who is actually like an officer in the army. Like, we get to, I think what makes this so impactful as an anti-war novel is the fact that we just like know him so deeply outside the context of war, only to for it to be almost certain that he's just going to get cut down in the trenches, like just like that. It's like, oh, the humanity.
Right.
I mean, it's kind of impossible not to develop some sort of, I guess, like fondness for a character when you're spending that long with him. It's the beauty of reading such a hefty novel.
Yeah, and I think your comparison is good too, where the kind of he was in this war of ideas between like kind of the debate sparring that takes up the majority of his time when he's at the sanatorium to actual firefights with like bullets and things now. Like it's kind of a completely different realm, and the stimulation is completely different and all of that. I mean, yeah, like there's that kind of, I think that's a purposeful contrast, and you're right, yeah, about how he was in this war of ideas, and like even for today's discourse, right? Like again, I think you had a tweet at some point where you said something about like all discourse was already discussed in like the Magic Mountain,
Right.
and we're all just having it
Exactly.
over and over again. Yeah, where it's like
Yeah.
we're constant war of words on social media and online and stuff like that, and in the papers and publishing houses. But then like this actual war is so different from it, and I don't know if that's just like because everybody has these high-minded ideas about violence, music, art, and they're going back and forth, religion, faith, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, that doesn't matter at all actually. Once you're in this trench here, watch what happens to the guy that was obsessed with that. Yeah. And
Yeah,
he just gets taken out.
right, like death just level, like the presence of death just levels all of that. Like,
Yeah.
I guess like there's so many
And it's
topics
been looming the
that.
whole time, right? Like, because death, and even at that one point, he gets really into visiting the sick patients on their deathbed and stuff. He
Right.
becomes this kind of like, I don't know, like death whisperer or whatever, and like takes it upon himself to wherever. Even the directors are like, "So what are you doing here?" Like, being the guy that
Like a
comes
chaplain.
in. Yeah, exactly, giving him the last rites or whatever. And he takes himself very seriously in that, but everyone else is like, "Oh, I mean, you're just another patient here. Like, what are you doing?" Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this kind of obsession with death, because it's talked about so often, and you do get to a point when you're reading this where like the first person dies who was kind of expected to die, and you're like, okay, yeah, another patient at the sanatorium, and you don't even really know him that well. It was just kind of described at the dinner tables or whatever. And then there's just more and more like, oh, there's somebody dying, somebody dying, somebody dying. Like he kind of gets desensitized to it too, even when his cousin eventually dies from the illness. Like he's almost very like doesn't. People are surprised at how kind of easily he takes. He doesn't even go to the funeral. He's like, oh no, I said my goodbyes like before they shipped his body off back home, and I don't know, like death becomes this thing that almost isn't, it's around him constantly, but he's just not considering it. And then, yeah, you get the contrast with that final war scene where he disappears into it, becomes just another person dying in the war. It's, yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's very interesting. Very interesting. I mean,
Right.
this is it, listeners. Yeah. I mean, this kind of like philosophical musings. And that's why I think there's something, maybe a book like this isn't as widely assigned or as widely read as something like Ulysses that has a lot of this as well. Where, I don't know, maybe because it is just such a dense book. And maybe it's still very famous, but not quite as famous as something like Ulysses and all of that. I don't know. I mean, I'm thinking, because I'm always asking myself too, when I read a great novel like this that's held up, this guy has a Nobel for literature, like he's held up as one of the greats of that era. I'm like, so why aren't we all being forced to read it when we go through all these years of schooling and stuff? We're being forced to read something from like 1960. Yeah, it's still a great book, but like it's not this in terms of how much philosophical stuff. And it's not like he gives you one answer or another. Like it's constantly back and forth. There's no definitive answer. Like these intellectuals are going back and forth. But I guess you could say he does give an answer where the one guy kills himself, Nafta kills himself. So like maybe that's an answer. His philosophy, the warning him, the Settembrini being like, well, he's a Jesuit, so be careful. Yeah. I mean, just these long speeches. I mean, the dialogue between these characters is just unbelievable. I mean, just I don't know. I mean, like there's room maybe for the book this long. You have room for all the characters to express themselves in these long kind of like speeches that they give, these long back and forths. But yeah, places, theme, illness, language and customs and the kind of institutions too. And I think of that too, like we're kind of going through something where that's changing, right? Like everybody, especially the Trump era back in 2016, the real thing everybody was upset about was the customs and language and kind of like decorum changing. And I mean, that's very kind of, reading something like this, kind of widening the lens, I'm thinking, yeah, like it's because everything felt like chaos because we were going through this catastrophic shift where the old rules and customs and language was being thrown out the window. And everybody was kind of like a free-for-all for a while where everybody was just saying whatever, you know, you don't have to be polite anymore. And like the debates, people are just name calling and stuff. It was like a shock to the system of like these kind of cultural norms and traditions and kind of decorum. And now apparently that's all gone. I mean, so like we're like in a new era. Nobody knows the rules. I don't know. So I kept doing comparisons to that.
Absolutely. I guess like another thing I meant when I said that this book kind of really speaks to our time is the atmosphere that it captures. I mean, firstly, the sense of lethargy that you feel for most of it. Like there was near the beginning, there was a description of like, it's very long, but let me just read part of it. All sorts of personal goals, purposes, hopes, prospects may float before the eyes of a given individual, from which he may then glean the impulse for exerting himself for great deeds. If the impersonal world around him, however, if the times themselves, despite all their hustle and bustle, provide him with neither hopes nor prospects, if they secretly supply him with evidence that things are in fact hopeless, without prospect or remedy, if the times respond with hollow silence to every conscious or subconscious question, however it may be posed, about the ultimate, unequivocal meaning of all exertions and deeds, and then it goes on, then it is almost inevitable, particularly if the person involved is a more honest sort, that the situation will have a crippling effect. It almost kind of like explains the rationale for like, I guess like him retreating into the sanatorium and doing nothing. But I guess like relating to what you were saying earlier about sort of Hans Castorp becoming more and more desensitized to death, there's a way in which the outside world kind of encroaches more and more upon this rarefied world of the sanatorium. Like we kind of get the first minor instance of violence with that one patient beating up the other patient, and it just keeps like escalating until we get to the war. Like you said, these wars of the intellect turning into a real war. And I guess like one thing that struck me the most about him becoming desensitized to death was like, I think when James Teenapple, the cousin, died, like I think it's just two sentences. Like I think he doesn't even like register it. It's almost as if it's mentioned for the reader's curiosity than something that Hans Castorp himself is affected by.
And this is where like the theme of kind of like the kind of culture of the institution, the practices, the customs, the language, like, he starts to adapt that, where they refer to the outside world as the flatlands, right? And they kind of create their own name, and they kind of almost romanticize it and be like, oh, well, they do things differently down there, you know, like
it's like they're the normies, like. And
then that starts to slowly encroach as he's taking more and more trips outside of the sanatorium into the little village down the mountain pass or whatever, and then that starts coming up and up, like they start melding more. So as the world is expanding, the more violence starts to come in to like the story. Yeah, very interesting way to put it for that. And I think like you said, like all the conversations people are having have already been had in this novel. Essentially, if you picked one book, where I think we're seeing that too in a kind of the real world, where the conversations were just heated debates, even if they weren't intellectually rigorous. You know, it was just some idiots going back and forth in comments. And now I think people are concerned at kind of an escalation in violence, like where there's actual physical, not just sparring intellectually, but sparring physically, and usually ideologically based. So, you know, whichever direction you want to go with that, listeners, you know, every side has their own kind of violent side here with people that want to do that. And I'm thinking, even the most recent stuff, like that governor of Pennsylvania? Like somebody tried to burn the fucking mansion down, like the governor's mansion down with his family in it. I think this happened. We're recording this on April 16th, listeners. This happened like a couple of days ago, and it was just kind of like, yeah, that's insane. Like that's a level of like, okay, now we're elevating this kind of, it's no longer like a discussion, a heated argument about policy. Now it's violence. Now it's kind of getting to this thing, and maybe the war ending this is appropriate, where like it always leads to that, even. Because then you think of World War One, all the countries involved, all of the culture and kind of, I don't know, things that you're fighting for. So let's just say culture or something, you know, way of life, customs, traditions, things that you believe in, the spirit of your country or something. I don't know, all that being put to the test in real time here, where it's like, oh, well, how principled are you about nonviolence? Because now it's come down to the gunfight, you know? And if you're the person that's principled and don't want to be violent, well, you're going to get killed, like, because it's a gunfight now, no longer intellectual stuff. I don't know. It's maybe the naivete. Yeah. There's that.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, yeah, and endless stuff. I just love that kind of culture of illness being absorbed into something, kind of like, what was I going to say about the kind of medical ethics in this terms of like the diagnoses and treatments, right? Like kind of like, and we mentioned this already, but kind of like the thinking you're sick almost makes you more sick. And like, even when they try to leave, like almost like the doctors are like, they're not shown to be like explicitly corrupt, but like it's kind of implied that like they're like saying you need more time, and like that's how they like make a living. So like, you know,
Right.
oh well, you need 6 more months. Yeah.
Right. They keep extending it by like, oh, just 5 more months, just 6 more months, and then your lungs will be better. You have a dark spot on your X. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, like it felt so familiar. Like just dealing with healthcare in America. Dr. Barron's would have loved insurance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or just
But
cutting a hole in your rib cage and shoving gas, like pumping gas into like your lung or whatever, like this kind of primitive early 20th century medicine.
Oh, that was ghastly.
And of course that makes you more ill, more likely to die if you're like the treatment's killing you, you know, like.
Oh, absolutely. Like that's one thing that I really love about reading these older books, is just like learning about all the quack cures people did back then. Like, I mean, you mentioned like the drilling a hole in the lung here, but then I think of like that horrible clubfoot surgery in Madame Bovary, or like I think in like what was that Heinrich von Kleist one, Michael Kohlhaas, like they make a guy like soak in the hot springs to heal his broken rib, like.
That and I wonder, do you think that Mann is mocking it slightly in this? Because it's not directly mocked, it's taken as like seriously and explained, but I still think there's like a level of mocking to it when he's describing these kind of like primitive early 20th century medical interventions. And obvious, I don't know, I mean, maybe that's just me projecting a modern view onto it, like reading back, be like, oh, these silly doctors didn't know what they were doing. But I don't know, did you get any of that out of like the prose, or like a kind of a mocking air to some of these cures that he describes in great detail that actually don't happen to him necessarily, besides the injections like later on? But like, yeah, like when he's describing like the Half Lung Club and stuff, and the kind of the people that have kind of been injured further by coming to this place of healing. I don't know. Do you think that there's any mockery in that, or am I projecting too much of like a modern view of medicine onto it? Or...
I did pick up on a little bit of that tone. That was actually something that surprised me about the book a little, was how funny it was, particularly the interactions between the patients and how they act. Like, there was one that made me laugh aloud, where some guy like shows up at the sanatorium and has a seizure, and he's just like writhing there, and everyone's like standing around, like running around in circles. Nobody knows what to do. And yeah, I guess there is like a sort of satirical tone when he in the parts where he is talking directly about the patients and the doctors and like the relations between them, that feels a little bit like a satirizing of these like outlooks on like health and healing, And also, I think like Set and Breedy keeps calling Dr. Barron's like the devil.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
at some
Yeah.
point. Yeah, yeah.
And it's about aesthetics more than healing. He keeps arguing that, like, yeah,
Right.
it's about the aesthetic that he likes instead of like the. But yeah, and like I said, it's very subtle. It wouldn't be, and obviously at that time, would he
He's
even
not a
know?
preacher.
Yeah, and would man even know what, it's not like we discovered the bad parts of these medical practices. I guess the mocking comes from like hearing about the treatment and then seeing them not get better. I don't know. I just got this kind of sense of it, subtle and very brilliantly, subtly done in terms of a literary craft. Like, and I was just like, like, what an advanced kind of like to even just understand that, well, they're not getting better, but you keep insisting on putting holes in their body and blasting them with radiation to get these x-rays. And I don't know. I mean, we like to think we're above that now, but then there's scandals all the time. Some mesh they
Right.
developed for some type of like, implant or something in people's bodies. Oh, all of a sudden that's actually killing people and there's a lawsuit. Like, I mean, there's more legal stuff to it now. And I mean, we didn't really talk too much about the culture of sanatoriums because I don't really know that much about it. Like, I mean, it's a kind of like a thing from another world to me. Like being born in the 80s, I was just kind of like, that didn't exist anymore. I remember there was like, even growing up in Baltimore, there was this old hospital that used to be one, and it was called Rosewood. And like, it was like this big sprawling, looked like a college campus, big sprawling facilities and houses and big old buildings. And they were all kind of decayed. I think at that time it had been kind of reduced to just kind of a nursing home type facility. So there was only like one wing still open and the rest was just dilapidated. And we used to get drunk and like go in there and like explore the abandoned, it was like a thing to do in college and high school to kind of explore this abandoned building pre the YouTube explosion of people doing that for money, abandoned viewing abandoned structures for that. So it was just us dicking around. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, this kind of culture of sanatoriums and kind of, that kind of rest cures. I don't know. I mean, it just seems so strange, but we still have these kind of medical, not even malpractice, because maybe sometimes they're doing it intentionally, but I think it is just kind of like trial and error. Like you're just trying out something, and if it works, it works, right? Like, I mean, obviously it's calculated. It's not just a guess. It's like people trying to like maybe take a leap after some careful calculation, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, because you think about the medical innovation that was happening at that time too. There was a lot of medical innovation happening at that time. Huge medical innovation compared to the previous, couple hundred years. But I don't know. Did you ever see that show, The Nick, with it was kind of
I
underrated.
haven't.
Yeah, it's kind of underrated, but it was basically Clive Owen plays this like doctor in like 1901 in New York, and like just like he kind of gets obsessed with like the experimentations that are happening in medical practice, and it's like that was the line that I always remember from that, of course, fictionalized story is more advancement has happened in medicine in the last 5 years than in the last 500, and he was saying this, in like 1905 or whatever. So like,
That's so funny.
yeah, like because there were these things where they started to experiment how to keep people alive during surgeries, like like how to do all that kind of stuff. Like modern surgery was being developed at this time, so there was this kind of I don't know. Yeah, I don't want to get too bogged down on that, but yeah, just incredible early 20th century medicine. Yeah, please.
I mean, I could see it. I could see it with if Thomas Mann was like critical of the sanatorium as an institution, just because like medicine is still kind of even now, like I would say like medicine is kind of in its infancy compared with like what we could know about the human body, particularly when it comes to like matters of the brain, I suppose.
Yeah.
So like, where is I gonna go with that?
I mean, it's a hot topic debate on podcasts and stuff too. Like when you follow that kind of, I'm a Sam Harris guy, and like neuroscience is his background, obsessed with the brain, like how the brain is, and we're so in the dark about so much of it. Yeah, that like,
right. Absolutely.
we
like
don't
you hear
even
about
know what makes us have conscious, like like that's kind of this obsession, and people philosophize because that's all we can do about it right now is just philosophize. Where does it come from? What does it mean? But we don't know the actual makeup of like, okay, the lights are on and you can perceive things around you, and like you can think of like where does that like how does that happen?
Mm.
and it's made of meat, like, it's tissue, like it's not like it's with electricity pulsing through it. Like, what the fuck is this? Like, yeah. I mean, I think
Right.
you're right. You're 100% right on that. Yeah, especially the neuroscience angle.
Mm.
And maybe we could extrapolate this even further in terms of the limits of knowledge, because that's what Hans Kostrup keeps bumping up against, his own kind of limits.
Mm.
And then he sees these
Yeah.
guys that are more advanced and having these very erudite, debates and stuff about
Mm.
philosophy and religion and the meaning of life and art. And he's kind of like, oh, I want to be a part of this. But
Mm.
then, like, we still don't quite know, like it's kind of the limits of your knowledge can be a hindrance, confuse. I don't know. I mean, I don't know where I'm going with that, but yeah,
Right. It's almost like he gets like it's almost like it's implied he'll like get cut down in the war before he can become like a NAFTA or a Set and Breeny
yeah,
himself. I was very curious what you made of Peepercorn because he kind of comes in after these two fellows have run their course in Hans Castorp's life, and like the two of them love to debate, but Peepercorn can barely speak like a coherent
right,
sentence. He doesn't seem to have like a single neurotic or cerebral bone in his body. He's pure physical presence almost. Like he's like this rich playboy with a Russian trophy wife, Madame Kusha, like just like
yeah.
coming in like that must have been so painful for Hans Castor waiting for all these years. And then
That
she shows up with like a guy. Yeah, yeah. Oof.
and like when he comes here, like it's almost like he's almost like this kind of another wizened father figure, almost like kind of
Mm.
teaching him like, oh, where did you hear that? Like, kind of, I don't think
Yeah.
so. And Hans becomes
Oh.
obsessed with other people's opinions and starts to absorb them as his own. Again, we're talking about social media, but also we're talking about this book,
Mm.
right? Like, when you're just
He's
received.
easily influenced.
Yes, yes, yes. And people don't like to admit that, but I feel myself sometimes being over influenced by, like, I don't know,
Mm.
somebody you're following or somebody you respect who has a podcast or whatever, and you're listening to it. You're like, oh, maybe I should reconsider. I don't know. I mean, like, you're like, well, wait a minute. Why am I even thinking about this? I've thought about this all the time, and I kind of know. I don't know. I mean,
Mm.
this kind of culture of the anxiety of influence, right? As Harold Bloom, as we always talk about on this podcast, listeners, Harold Bloom's anxiety of influence, and you can see it in Hans Korstad. And again, that's more literal than what Bloom means in that book. Listeners, listen to that episode if you haven't. But, like, the kind of literal, he's being influenced and then having anxiety about which direction to go, and constantly turning
Mm.
it over in his head. And he almost gains confidence towards the end too, where he's interjecting in the conversations to the point where that one which I want to get to about the religion kind of back and forth, when he starts to
Mm.
interject and, like, Septembrini is like, silence, good engineer, like, just screams at him like, no, like, you're interrupting, this is a heat of the moment,
Mm.
like, kind of
Yeah.
like, you're not ready to interject just yet, like,
Mm.
get down. But
Right.
yeah, please.
Before we get to that, I'm just gonna run to the bathroom.
Oh
Sorry.
yeah, please, yeah.
I'll
Bathroom
be
breaks,
right
yeah.
back.
No worries at all. No worries at all. Yeah, please. If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right, Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, Jerk Shop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard.
Alrighty, I'm back. Could you just remind me which page the religion debate was on so I can look at it too?
For me, where did I
Was it like when Set and Breeding moves off the mountain into that house where he's roommates with Nafta?
Yes, that's yeah, and that's
Oh,
after his plain king that he calls it and all that too.
I love that
Um,
phrase.
Irony. This just the quote with Settembrini on irony. I wanted your thoughts on this because, again, this, since we already said, listeners, the social media discourse has already been had in this novel 100 years ago. irony's become such a fucking topic. Especially in the art world. You could go back even 25 years, DFW and stuff was talking about irony and why we should move away from it in a certain sense in literature and art and stuff. Page 217 of my version in that like freedom section. Just the quote from where they're talking about irony. Settembrini says, "Ah, yes, irony. Beware of the irony that flourishes here, my good engineer. Beware of it in general as an intellectual stance. When it is not employed as an honest device of classical rhetoric, the purpose of which no healthy mind can doubt for a moment, it becomes a source of depravity, a barrier to civilization, a squalid flirtation with inertia, nihilism, and vice." What do you think of that? Yeah, yeah.
I think he's so right. I mean, I literally have that quote highlighted in my book. Like,
Yes.
as soon as you brought up irony, I knew which part you were talking about, but I wanted to hear it again. I mean, I think he's right personally, and it's very much in line with everything else he said to Hans Castorp about, like, you must form opinions. And irony is kind of like the barrier to that.
It leads to apathy almost. Like nihilism,
Right.
the vice, this kind of a who cares, nobody cares. And you hear that constantly, particularly, which is disappointing when you're trying to talk with art about people to other people and stuff. Like, oh, well, who cares if you like have a different, it's like, well, I fucking care. I fucking care about it, man. That's who, like, I care deeply about what you like, what you think of this, what this is. How to perceive it. I care deeply about how that's going on. What are you talking about? Who cares? I do.
Right.
But yeah, absolutely. Please.
Oh no, keep going.
But yeah, I mean, just the irony of this, like, kind of, it's almost like a crutch, especially creatively. And I say, like, this is such a thrill to read as a creative too, as somebody who's striving to be an artist and create art. There's like just the back and forth about it, because Hans Castorp kind of plays like kind of the ignorant fool when he's talking to Settembrini and kind of, oh really, I didn't consider kind of like stuff, and he's just kind of, and Settembrini's just opining about this stuff that I just but yeah, I do want to do that. And then kind of the last thing with literature loves suffering, I wanted to ask you about that too. I mean, so much of what I was pulling out here, I was pulling out quotes. I had like 7 pages of just things where I was just like, all right, this is too many quotes. We're never going to get through all of this. But when he talks about,
Or not to do.
yeah, literature loves suffering. I wanted your thoughts on this. I'll read the quote real quick from Air Settembrini. It is a very complex task, Air Settembrini said, musing, demanding much prudence and vast reading, especially, he added now, his gaze seemingly lost in the immensity of his mission, especially because literature has regularly chosen suffering as its topic. Even masterpieces of only second or third rank have been concerned with it in one way or another. But no matter, all the better. And I was just interested on your thoughts on this kind of like literature loving suffering and kind of like being this obsession. And I hear Gen X writers talk about this all the time. Like, oh, it's pain that motivates me. Oh, it's my suffering. Suffer for your art, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. What do you think of that? What do you think of Settembrini's quote, the cultural like zeitgeist around it, all of that? What are your thoughts on kind of literature loving suffering, particularly?
Oh man, so I need like a moment.
I know
to
it's a big question. It's a big philosophical. Yeah. However you want to answer it. Yeah.
Oh man.
Or just you think of like, maybe we could even say that it's just a good part for drama. Maybe Settembrini's being too cynical, whereas like suffering leads to good story and drama, where you read somebody's suffering or their overcoming of their journey. The hero's journey technically has to have suffering in it for them to overcome and blah, 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 and be, the kind of like structural elements to story. But I think also we could philosophize broader if you wanted to. But yeah, like I said, any way you want to approach that in terms of your own writing, what you see in terms of your taste. I mean, anything, in terms of literature loving suffering. I just thought it just struck me. I was like, I have to ask Maggie about this.
Right. That quote really struck me as well. And I've never really been sure what to make of it, because again, this is another one of those topics that will never die.
Yeah.
I mean, I think his basic observation is true that literature loves suffering. I guess it kind of goes back to that oft quoted opening, all happy families are alike.
Right.
Where was I going with that? Um,
I think it's
y-
true too, because there's like this suffering, but it's also interesting. Like it's also interesting
uh,
to read a fictional or nonfiction about someone's suffering, their journey, about the hardships of life. I mean, what's the philosophical? I mean, I don't know shit about philosophy. I can't stand reading philosophy books, but like, life is suffering, right? Like kind of the
mm,
Jordan Peterson light, like kind of, yeah. I don't know.
right. And I
Yeah.
think there is something about suffering or perhaps even hardship in general that really kind of causes one to reflect and hopefully like come to some interesting insight on their situation in a way that someone who is like content with the state of things might not. Um, although that isn't to say like, oh, like all art must come from suffering. Like I think that's something that's more personal and individualized. Like I do believe in the power of sublimation, but I think it just works differently for everyone.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a very interesting quote. I just don't really quite know what I make of it. I think it's very complicated.
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, that's why I was fascinated and wanted to ask you. Yeah, because I think it is. It
Mm,
is complicated. Because yeah, I mean, if there's a story, particularly literature, right? If we're just going to narrow it down to that, if there's a story where somebody isn't suffering, it's probably a boring story. I mean, it's probably not
mm,
that interesting to read. Um, yeah, I mean, trial and triumph kind of, that's like the basis of all of literature, all the, I mean,
mm.
so yeah, there's something to it. Maybe Septembrides being too cynical for something like that, but I mean, yeah, I think there's definitely kind of an over obsession with suffering for sure, especially when you talk about, I think artists kind of lean on that because they're kind of,
Mm.
it's hard to come up with an answer as to when somebody says, well, what inspired this, or where did this come from, and you're like, well, I don't, it just
Right.
popped into my fucking head, like I don't know. But like you have to give an answer in an interview and you say, oh well, it's this pain I carry around with myself and it makes me more inclined to be creative, unlike you peasants that don't suffer quite like me, like it's just this kind of thing you can say to explain away whatever artistic decision or something you make. And I don't know, something like that. I think that's where somebody like Sette would have a fair point. But then it's also like, but yeah, but who wants to read a story about somebody who's perfectly happy and nothing bad happens and, the story ends? It's like, okay, well, nobody wants to read that.
Right. I wonder if that just has something to do with the way that artists, especially writers, might be more prone to narrativizing their lives. Because I think, like, when it comes to whether art comes from misery, I don't necessarily think writers suffer more than other people. I think they're just like more attuned or like willing to think attuned to or willing to think about it at length. I mean, every misery is just part of the human condition. Um, and I mean, I kind of understand the urge to narrativize it. I think it kind of relates back to like illness as an identity. Like you want to point to that one illness or that one traumatic event or just some like core that your life revolves around. And even if it's not like necessarily true, even if it's like more complicated than that, I think it just makes for like a concise answer or narrative.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, and I mean, you can lean into that or you can exaggerate that if you want, or you can lean away from it and
Right.
say, oh, it's nothing. Because that's what irritates me more recently because I see it, and again, maybe it's always been the case, but I just see it now, especially when it comes to poetry, which is what I'm kind of trained in. People were saying things like even a few years ago, they're just like, oh, poetry can be anything. It can be a bag of dirt. And I'm just like, no, it fucking can't. Like, what are you talking about? Like, no, like, that's way too far in the other direction. Like, no. Sorry, your diary entries aren't poetry, listeners. Sorry. But yeah, I don't know.
I'm not a
Okay.
poet, so I'm just spectating from the outside.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, poets are all, they're all full of shit. Uh, but I wanted to talk about when the Mardi Gras ball, because the Mardi Gras ball is like one of the most thrilling things because he's finally getting to touch
Mm.
Clavidia or Clavdia, what the fuck's her name? Chlamydia.
She
And
shows him just a little sliver of ankle.
yeah, her arms. Yeah, that was what I kept laughing. He kept like referring to her bare arms and like how turned
Mm.
on he was by her bare arms. And I was like, yeah, this is definitely like a 1920s version of like boobs or butt or whatever. Like, yeah,
Mm.
definitely. Um, but then that's at the same time where he asked her for the pencil, literally reliving this like vague memory he has from childhood, and then also like that's the same time when Septembrini calls her Lilith.
Oh my God.
And like,
beware.
Yeah, that like you're setting yourself up for failure, young man.
Yeah.
That, so I don't know, what do we think of that in terms of Hans Castorp's like, he's been dying to have a conversation with this woman, and all he can do is ask her for this pencil, and then like get on his knees and just like beg her like to confess his love to her, to the point where she's kind of like almost charmed by his like, I don't know, desperation for it or whatever. I don't know. I mean, what do you make of that scene with the Mardi Gras ball where he gets the thing that he's been longing after for like a year at the sanatorium?
So on the topic of the pencil, firstly, this is another crazy aspect of the book that I don't think we even touched on so far, but so Hans Castorp is attracted to Madame Cochat because she reminds him of a Slavic boy that he had a crush on as a teenager. And he asked this boy for a pencil, and that was like the only interaction they had or something. And then and then the fact that he replicates this exact action with Madame Cochat on the night of Walpurgis night, he's kind of makes him think that, oh, like we're fated to be together or something. Like there's an element of like perceived fate in that. But I guess what stuck out to me about that scene was how many pretexts he had to go through to even talk to her, because I think at one point they're talking in French, perhaps because not just because that's the language they have, the most fluent language they have in common, but as if German is like too intimate and he needs to like keep what is happening at a distance as he chats up this woman. And the fact that everyone's in costume as well, like all the people in the sanatorium are dressed up for this, as if he needs like the pretext of this one night of debauchery and the costumes and the distance of a language that is not one's own to do this thing, to chat up this woman who is probably not someone that he would have gone for were he not in the sanatorium, because he makes a lot of references to how like after a while in the sanatorium, he's like, oh, I can't relate to those like foolish little geese who live down in the flatlands. What I love about Madame Cochat is her illness. Yeah. And that's like, it just goes against his like respectable bourgeois instincts. So I guess that's kind of why he had to put so much distance between himself and what he's doing.
We all fall victims to like a sexy Slavic woman. If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right, Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, Jerk Shop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard. Yeah,
Nice.
what
That's
were we
perfect.
talking about?
I think the Walpurgis night chapter where Hans is like chatting up Claudia and she like flashes her arm like, at him. But yeah, I think
The
it
pencil,
cut off
his,
like
the little Slavic boy he's obsessed with, and the pencil, and yeah.
yeah, I think I'll just repeat what I said about it. But
Please.
but yeah, so firstly, one thing that we didn't get to before. Oh, sorry. Let me just start over. I need to like get back into like podcast headspace.
No, yeah, please.
Yeah. But so before I talk about this chapter, one really crazy thing that we didn't get into yet is the fact that Hans Castorp is attracted to Claudia Cochat because she looks like a Slavic boy that he had a crush on as a teenager. And I think the only interaction they had at that point was he asked him for a pencil. He asked Hans for a pencil, and the fact that Claudia kind of does the same thing the night of Walpurgis night makes Hans think like, oh, it's fated. Like we're fated to be together. Like there's something like the pencil is the red string that joins them. And one thing that stuck out to me about this scene was the fact that he had to go through so many pretexts and masks to talk to Claudia Cochat. Like he talks to her in French, not just because that's the only fluent language they share in common, but also because perhaps German is like too intimate for him to express how he really feels about Claudia Cochat. Also the fact that everyone is wearing their Mardi Gras costumes, so um, there's it's like the literal mask.
Yeah.
What else? Yeah, just like it's almost as if this night of debauchery and exceptionalism serves as a pretext for him to say these things that he couldn't say before, probably because, I mean, Madame Cochat, like, she's not like a woman that Hans Castorp would have gone for, were he not in the sanatorium. Like he even talks about how, like, after some time in the sanatorium, he says that he can no longer relate to like, oh, like those silly little geese in the
Yeah.
flatlands, and that's precisely what he loves about Madame Cochat, the fact that she's ill, she understands his illness, like they're coming together from this place of illness, and that's something that would have been very antithetical to Hans Castorp's like bourgeois, respectable upbringing. So yeah, it's kind of wild how like all these pretexts he had to go through just to articulate something so simple. What did you think of this very pivotal chapter?
I was again enthralled by this kind of their back and forth and speaking French to one another with it, and like it's interesting that we said like yeah he views it. You're right. He views it as this connection, this destiny that was always meant to be, and that the reason he asked that boy for his pencil all those years ago was so that he could ask her for this pencil right now, which is interesting because it does kind of show that maybe he's getting somewhat delusional up in the sanatorium, like kind of constantly philosophizing and stuff. But like, it's interesting too because that boy that he keeps bringing up, because it's mentioned in like the first 100 pages, and then it keeps being like a memory that he goes back to, almost like he gets obsessed with people that he views as better than him in some way, or like intellectually, or yeah, culturally, or like yeah, mannerisms, the politeness, the expected customs and stuff. He kind of is enamored by that. And then I don't know, he like loved how perfect that boy was. He was always well behaved. He was always good in school and stuff. And he was like, I want to be like that person because, I don't know. And then Madame, he comes to this point where maybe because of those masks and stuff, he feels like he can. Or isn't there like some mention of like the directors leaving for a moment and like chaos ensuing, and that's when he like seizes to his chance to confess his like love, and
Right.
she is charmed by it a little bit, maybe she almost charmed by maybe the patheticness of it. I don't know, like
She's very like obliging, but in the way that a 30-year-old woman would be obliging to like a 23-year-old young man hitting on her. But yeah, it is interesting how like the doctor has to leave for that to happen, almost as if he's like a quasi father figure. It's like, oh, like my parents aren't watching. Now we can really get in on. I guess like another thing that sticks out about Madame Cochat for me was I guess like Thomas Mann's ephebophilia and also his slavophilia, kind of like because the because firstly, Death in Venice, old German man in love with little Polish boy, and then we have Hans Castorp's schoolboy crush. I think he was like Czech, maybe. There's a way in which like Eastern Europe, the East, kind of like functions as this like site of like Dionysian impulses. It's like very exoticized, and I think it's almost like that's kind of where Hans Castorp can like release like these like pent up like irrational impulses only when he's around like Slavic people. And the little boy thing, I think that's just Thomas Mann. I mean, I think he was like bisexual right? Like as far as I know, like even though he married a woman, but like there was a scene in his diary where he was like watching one of his sons in the pool and like talking about like how beautiful like his 14-year-old body was. Like that's just Thomas Mann. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting too. I mean, yeah, who can resist a sexy Slavic woman? I don't know. I guess there's that too.
Mm,
And then right after this is like, there's all this. He gets kind of this after this kind of reflection on eternity and time, which has been a theme the whole time. But when he calls himself playing king, when he
mm,
calls his little kind of, again, as I said, the more kind of boring chapters, but like where he's kind of going into like the depths of like the conversations and stuff he witnessed, and then also like his own research, he calls it playing king, which is interesting way to put it, right? That to even have his own fantasies and intellectual desires, intellectual or sexual kind of desires and fantasies, there's almost like an air of guilt about it, like where he's just like, oh, I'm playing king here, and like I shouldn't be. I don't know, but when he's just talking about like, the things going through his head, but like he's almost like this kind of built-in guilt to it, or like him. Maybe it's a way of showing that he hasn't found himself or something, or he's insecure, or I don't know. But I thought that was like playing king, like interesting.
right. There's kind of an ironic tone to like the way he says playing king in some of these parts, almost as if he and I sense a little bit of that guilt as well, as if he is a little bit conscious about the duties that he's shirking down in the flatlands, which become less and less prominent throughout the novel as it like ebbs from his mind. But I mean, for quite a large portion, there wasn't there like that job at the dock that he was like supposed to go to, because initially he was only supposed to visit the sanatorium for 2 weeks and then started that job. And I mean, he basically ghosts this job, and we never really know like what happens to that. Like, there, like there is.
When his uncle comes to like kind of retrieve him, like this is like
Mhm.
year 2, I think, of him being there, and he's
Yeah.
like, and like the contrast, I think that was a very important part too. Yeah, kind of like they show the
Mhm.
contrast between like his uncle being like, "What the fuck are you doing here?" and then
Mhm.
Kostarp being like, well, I mean, this is just the way things are. What are you talking about?" Like when the uncle's confused, like man makes a point to show the kind of indifference or the kind of comparison to how Hans has been kind of not corrupted, but just embraced this kind of the customs and norms of the sanatorium, which are so alien to people that live in like the real world, like his uncle, that like his uncle eventually gives up after like a week. Like, I can't be around this place. Like, I need to go back. And they just like lets him stay there. And I think you're right. Yeah. It kind of shows that what being too absorbed in one thing can do to you. Really, it can ruin you in that sense. I don't know, which may be apart from all the death and stuff like that, and might be like one of the bigger tragedies in this book that Mann's trying to show is how if you're not careful, yeah, or if you get too into something without checking with the real world, and you see Settembrini like kind of almost as a character like looking out for Hans in that way, like when he like is nervous, he's like my good engineer, like you need to calm down a little bit, like you need to get a grip on the world here if you're going to just go on endlessly with NAFTA's interpretations of this stuff. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, that's very interesting.
Right. That almost everyone in the sanatorium fails to maintain contact with the outside. I mean, even Settembrini, like I think he was supposed to write that encyclopedia for that like League of Humanists, but in the end he can't even do that, and that itself was a downgrade from like being able to attend the conference in person, which I don't think Dr. Barron's let him do.
The humanist too, because that gets us to the big kind of, I mean, I think almost like one of the peaks of the book for me was the big conversation between Settembrini and NAFTA in that little house that they rent or whatever above the tailor in the village. Because I think it is this kind of, one, I think there's a lot of great quotes about art and stuff like that, but I was just kind of enthralled by that like back and forth about objective truth, and like I wonder if Mann was just like his way of showing this kind of like endless debate that you can get sucked into, because like there's hard to come up with an answer. But all right, lots of good quotes from NAFTA as well here, where I was just kind of another one of those things like Septembrini, where I was just underlining so much that I was like, we're never going to be able to cover all of this, but I like, all right, we'll do the ones that I like. Where he said, this is on page 386 in my version, in the City of Good and Evil Deliverance, that section, where he says, works of art from a world in which the soul expresses itself, NAFTA responded, are always beautiful to the point of ugliness and ugly to the point of beauty. It is indeed a law. We are dealing with beauty of the spirit, not of the flesh, which is basically stupid and abstract as well. He added, the beauty of the body is abstract. Only inner beauty, the beauty of the religious expression, possesses true reality. What do you make of that quote? As an artist, as a reader, as...
I think that quote really kind of expresses the complexity of beauty, particularly the sublime. Like it's beautiful and it's terrifying. It's not like beautiful in the conventional sense where it's like, oh, like that's pretty to look at. Like oddly enough, I thought of Madame Cauchat again when I read this. I think she is one of the elements in the novel that seems to embody what NAFTA is talking about. Like her beauty isn't in any sort, her beauty or what attracts Hans to her isn't in any sort of, isn't really in her physical appearance other than maybe the arms. It's in the way she slams the door and like her illness, these like abject and horrifying, perhaps to Hans Castorp's sensibilities, things that really draws him to her.
Yeah, like the air about her, not so much the physical stuff, but which is all tied up in it too. And then I think from there is where we move on to the huge bit about kind of objective truth. And I had at one point, like, it was just like, I think from page in my version, from like page 390 to page, let me see here, like 399 through 400, I was just like marking the entire page, where I was just like, this is something that I want to revisit throughout my life which is the kind of back and forth about kind of objective truth and its importance in art and stuff like that. I don't know. I mean, there's so much, we don't have to go into all of this, because again, this these beautiful long kind of things of dialogue about, I have so many pages marked here, where Settembrini is challenging NAFTA, and he basically says, no, let's be serious, Professor. Here in the presence of these two attentive young people, answer one question for me, please. Do you believe in truth, in objective scientific truth, that the strive for it is the highest law of morality, that its triumphs over authority are the most glorious page in the history of the human spirit? And they kind of go back and forth about this, kind of like the objective truth. And I guess this is like, you mentioned humanist already. I don't know enough about the history of the humanist kind of movement, but I imagine it was starting to blossom in this age of kind of inquiry where people were calling themselves humanists, and it was kind of like a secular way to be, I don't know, spiritual even, or to care about the sacredness of humans and civilization without the religious affiliation. Because I remember this was big in the 60s too, like in the 70s, a lot of artists would say that they were humanists or something. And I don't know if this is Mann's way of kind of putting the arguments against each other for the humanist versus the kind of more spiritual or religious side of viewing humanity and art and all culture and all that comes with it. But I mean, it's thrilling to read, listeners. Like, even if you read nothing of this book, like read this section of their kind of back and forth. But it reminded me a lot of, I don't know how online you are in terms of following this stuff that has been going on, but this is like way back in 2017 when Jordan Peterson was blowing up. He went on Sam Harris's podcast, and as I mentioned before, I'm a Sam Harris fan. And the entire time I was listening to them, or basically reading Settembrini and NAFTA argue back and forth, I kept thinking of that conversation because it came up at a certain point, and it did become this sort of spiritual or more religious side versus this kind of humanist, like worship reason type thing. Because Peterson they were talking about objective truth and they couldn't agree on what they were talking about. And like the first one they ever did together, it became like an hour and a half long thing of Paris trying to pin Peterson down on like, well, what is objective truth? And Peterson wasn't giving in and kind of saying that, like, well, he kind of took the NAFTA argument, whereas like the utility of it is what makes it true. So I don't know. I just read this kind of enthralled with his kind of, and then Settembrini accuses him of being utilitarian about it. But I don't know. I was just thinking about this endless kind of debate about objective truth. And I think it is something that has obviously always been argued in intellectual circles. But I think in our even just mundane average discourse, people hold that up as like a huge authority, right? Like, I've discovered an objective truth, therefore I'm correct, or my whatever thing I want to propose is correct, my policy or my opinion on art or whatever it is. And like, I don't know, I just was fascinated by that. I thought it just captured like the debates that people have constantly. Like you already said, everything that's happening online already happened in this book 100 years ago. And it's just, I don't know. I mean, this kind of,
I can't say I'm super familiar with the philosophical debate that you mentioned, or with philosophy in
don't
general.
worry about it. Don't
But
worry
I guess
about it.
what stuck out to me in particular was the religion versus secular humanism
Yes.
kind of dichotomy here. I mean, Settembrini, I think he really offends Joachim at one point because he says that his grandfather was talking about how like, oh, like the French Revolution, like that's like the birth. He
Yes.
likens its importance to that of the birth of baby Jesus. But then you have NAFTA, who like grew up in like a very observant Jewish family and then like converted to Catholicism in adulthood. Like he's kind of like speed ran like all of the Abrahamic faiths. Like
Right. He's like the tradcast online. Yeah.
right. Oh my God. He's definitely the person that I think would be least out of place like in the modern world. Like NAFTA.
He'd fit right in. Yeah, he'd fit right in with all that. I could start rattling off names, but I know that's it's boring.
Yeah. Like
But I was so fascinated by it. And maybe it's just me because I have been fascinated by kind of religious, or let's even broaden spiritual revival that we're going through culturally, where the younger generation is suddenly more spiritual and or religious of the previous 70 years. It kept going down, and all of a sudden we have a spike now. And I think that is interesting in terms of, Barry Weiss. I'm name dropping, but she just had a great panel with a bunch of people that discussed this, including Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who I think is doing very interesting stuff right now in terms of arguing against atheism, but she's arguing it from like a very kind of cultural angle, not so much that you have to believe, but kind of I don't know. I mean, it's just interesting how that happens. And I was listening. It's great because I was kind of sympathetic to NAFTA and Settembrini in the back and forth. And I was just, I think it was so long since a work of literature had actually made me like really think about something like this and kind of pique all these interests in me and kind of, I mean, maybe it's just an age old endless debate. So that's partly why it's interesting. But I think just particularly given the culture we're swimming in with these back and forth. Yeah. And then people just pretending to be Catholic online. Like, I don't understand it. Like I don't understand what was happening for a while. And then all of a sudden, like 4 years later, there's this huge spike in like 18 to 34-year-olds, like being Catholic, or I don't know. Like it's just very interesting to me where like we're seeing this out of this. So, I mean, a listener, incredibly stimulating novel, not just for like craft wise, if you're a writer and you like literature, but I think intellectually too. Like, I mean, again, it's so long, I don't even want to read the whole thing because it's just pages and pages of them going back and forth.
I mean, I think NAFTA's Catholicism is genuine, at least. Like, I mean, it probably helps that he already like grew up in like a religious environment, because I think that's the kind of thing that you kind of have to have that scaffolding from a young age. Like if I were to like suddenly become devout now, I don't think that would be possible because I mean, faith is kind of all about believing in like one objective
Right.
truth, and you can't really do that when you've, I don't know, like when you've drank from the goblet of like secular humanism. But yeah, I
Were
mean,
you raised? Were you? Well, you said you were kind of from Boston. Were you raised Catholic or religious up there?
no,
No.
completely secular. Um, but what was I gonna say? But yeah, like I was raised completely secular. Like my parents are from China, which is like atheist, not at all mired in like the Christian tradition. So it's not like atheism in the sense that Americans like call themselves atheists, but kind of replicate the structures of Christianity
Right.
anyway. It's like a genuine like absence of like that particular framework of thinking in general. Um, but yeah, it is interesting how this is kind of like a cyclical, like evergreen topic, I suppose. What was I gonna say?
But I
But
agree
yeah,
with
like
you. No, please. If you got it. If you just thought of
yeah,
it, go.
um,
I ruined it. Sorry. I broke your train of thought. Sorry.
no worries. I think I was gonna say something about like I don't know, just like that about like NAFTA's desire for about like or just the general desire for religiosity and how it's like a desire to connect with
Yeah.
what one perceives to be like a more authentic past. Like he's kind of associated with like medievalism in
And he actually, I think, states something
yeah.
about the late medieval period and how that's like the best art that ever got created because it was this kind of, yeah, there's like a direct
Mm,
mention of that. But the only reason I
right.
asked you about, because interesting to me, and again,
Mm,
despite everybody around me suddenly like pretending that they've been these religious people their entire lives or converting religions, like I was
mm,
raised Catholic like my entire life,
mm,
and my parents were not these strict devout people, or anything like that. They were the modern people that like grew up in this thing, but they like raised me in it. And I would say I call myself atheist now. I would say that happened around 17, 18, going into college and discovering people like Sam Harris and Ayaan Hirsi Ali. A big one, Christopher Hitchens, was one of my favorites. So
right.
I still am kind of in that. And I remember talking to my dad about this recently because my father was always, he never told me he was atheist, but he was a man of science and stuff like that.
Mm,
He would never be like, oh, I don't believe in God or God isn't real. But when I got older and started talking to him about this stuff, he would kind of opened up about it. And like, yeah, and I was talking to him recently about, yeah, all these people kind of around me just suddenly believing in God. And I was like, man, part of me wishes I could. Like, part of
mm,
me is like,
right.
I don't know. I would have to have some type of near death experience or something where like I saw a vision in order for me to probably, I just can't believe it, like it's just
Mm,
until I'm proved otherwise, it's hard for me to believe that stuff.
mm,
Um, but I don't know, because that's when I think somebody like Ayaan Hirsi Ali is arguing more, not so much from the belief angle, but from the cultural angle. Whereas like there's actually
right.
values in here that are baked into the cake of Western
Mm,
civilization in this way.
yeah. You can never
And
escape it
right, you can never escape
fully.
it however you want to. Yeah,
Mm,
you're always kind of tied into it. So it is just kind of, yeah, I mean, I'm sympathetic to that. And like, I
mm,
understand why people are desperate for this. And they're kind of,
mm.
yeah, I mean, and then you have people that weren't even alive and they're talking about Vatican II. And again, not to get into the weeds of
Yeah,
this stuff. And
it's so larpy.
I'm just like, shut up. Like, shut the fuck. You
Yeah.
don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Like, you have
Mm,
no fucking idea. You literally just became Catholic 2 fucking minutes ago. And now you're telling people
yeah.
that have been Catholic, their families have been Catholic for thousands of years. You're telling them that, like, oh, they made a terrible mistake in the 60s before any of us. Like, shut up. Like, you don't, like, oh my God. And I get they're
No one
making
like
the argument about the power structure and how it was diluted at that time. It's like, yeah, it was diluted because we were literally living through a cultural revolution at that time. It was the fucking 60s in America. Like, what are you talking about? Yeah.
no one's a greater pedant than the newly converted. Like I
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
wonder how genuine some of that is because like I've gone to like
I don't
mass, I've
believe
gone
any
to
of it. Yeah. I don't
synagogue just
believe
out of
any of it.
curiosity. And when I see people like recite these prayers or like sing these songs that have been inculcated into them since birth, I think there is something very powerful and instinctive about it that I think one kind of needs in order for there to be true faith. Like,
Right.
yeah, like not to use the word brainwashing, but it kind of does have to be inculcated, like before you can kind of before you can form your own opinions, as Hans Castorp does. Like if it had been NAFTA that got to him before Set and Brini did, we'd be reading a very different book.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's interesting to me too, because when you talk about actually the rituals physically in the church or something, like, yeah, growing up with that, I have them memorized just because I've just spent so much time in it. And so I went to Catholic schools growing up, so we would have stuff like this too. And then even in high school, my Catholic school, religion was like a course we had to take, and it was like things that we would do every year. And like it was actually set up almost like a college, where like the first year and freshman year you learn about the history of Christianity. Second year you learn about the Gospels, essentially, where you go in depth on the teachings of quote unquote, of Jesus specifically in the Gospels and the New Testament. Third year it kind of becomes about putting that into your life. At least this is how they had it set up when I was in high school for this. And then the final year they actually have you do what they call like relationships and transition, where how you would put that into like your life in the future. And then the second part of that last year in high school, they had you do world religion stuff, where you study other religions and practices and stuff like that.
I like how that comes last.
Yeah. But it because it was taken seriously though, like it was taken seriously at like a theological studying level, like, okay,
Yeah.
this is what we're teaching, but also this is how this culture deals with death versus this. And then this is how this, and it was, as an 18-year-old learning that, it was kind of going through the atheism stuff. But yeah, I don't believe anybody that's telling me that they're like this devout Catholic now all of a sudden. I'm like, no, you're not. This is an aesthetic that you're putting on, a mask at the Mardi Gras ball that's giving you the courage to talk to the hot chick. Like that's what it is. But then again, I don't want to diminish people that are probably true believers. But like, yeah, I don't know.
Right.
I mean,
Everyone needs a narrative.
and that's what I think is I struggle with, and I'm more obsessed with what I call faith. I'm very interested in this, what it gives you, what it takes from you. And like you said, having that, I think that's the emptiness people feel, and they're trying to fill it with this thing where there is this kind of, life is a little bit easier. If you can think to yourself, when something bad happens to you, something catastrophic, you can think, oh, well, this is God's plan for me. Or this is meant to happen so that I can, it is a human psychological tool to get through hardships, like to make your life a little easier. And like, I do wish I had something like that, especially when you go through hard times, like I do kind of long for it. But then at the same time, I have that kind of my rational, educated brain being like, I can't believe it. Like, it's so hard for me to just pretend that I believe it all of a sudden, even though I believed it like when I was like 12, 13, up until I started reading all these atheists in the early 2000s.
Yeah, too much to go back to that state.
Exactly. There's no going back. Yeah, there's no going back. And like I said, pending any kind of near-death experience or something where you're, I don't know, maybe that could convert me to, because that's when you actually feel it. Like, and you're like, it's like, oh, I touched the other side. I don't know. But like, yeah, that was one of the most interesting parts, because the points that are being made are both good. And you're just kind of going back, and you're seeing Hans Castorp understanding that too. And he's almost interjecting, like kind of just excited. Like he's like, when he slams his hands on the table at one point, he goes, excellent. Like as like when a retort comes, like he's just intrigued by this back and forth. I mean, so was I. And yeah, so was Maggie in that too.
Right. He wants to participate so badly, because in the earlier dialogues, he's an invisible presence, just listening to Set and Brady monologue at him this whole time. But gradually he kind of starts to develop a perspective of his own that, I mean, Set and Brady's not letting him share, but
right, yeah.
Yeah. I'm just curious sorry, what's that?
Please, no, please.
Oh, it's okay. I'm just curious what you made of the I wonder what you made of NAFTA's view, kind of like leading to his suicide, almost like do you think it was like the logical conclusion of his beliefs, or maybe forcing Set and Brini to view his sudden death from up close kind of puts him in touch with that near death experience that would, I guess, like convert him over to his views.
It's very interesting. Yeah, that's interesting, because it is this, you could look at it a couple of different ways, where it could be this martyrdom, the ultimate proof of his faith. And this is what a lot of atheists said in the early 2000s. Like I said, Hitchens kind of would famously debate these religious figures very publicly, and he was, very lively and charismatic, and he was very quick-witted, almost like a Settembrini with his tongue, when talking to people like this. And there is that level of, if you believe this, why don't you just kill yourself and go to paradise, right? Like the Muslim faith or something, where like, die for it because it's right there waiting for you if you believe it's true, and maybe there's that angle you could take of it, or you could take it as like, when you have such strongly held faith in something, if something does shatter it, if something does come into it to make you doubt, even just a little grain of sand in the gears, that it can be devastating when you think of yourself a certain way and you're presented with a different way that is more true, or the reality. It is, this is life ending for some people. You cannot, I don't know. So it is interesting in terms of how I think somebody like Naphtha would view it. I think more as approving, like almost an argument he's making, especially the way that he did it in front of him, like kind of as if that's like a final argument, like nail in the coffin of the argument, literally. And I don't know. But I think you could interpret it. That interpretation is still open, that Naphtha lost faith, or that not that he was convinced by Settembrini. Because even that, like, that's one great thing I give to Mann, is when you're reading these back and forths with them, when they're philosophical and intellectual debates, they are jumping all over the place, just like everybody does, just like human beings do, where you're making loose connections, you're making solid connections, you're bouncing back and forth, you're extrapolating, you're putting an opinion next to a fact, and like it's kind of all this back and forth. It does bounce around, so like you never get to the full answer, or like a definitive argument. I don't know. That is interesting, and I think why Mann chose to show that the more religious side chose to do that. And I guess you could say he knew he was ill, he knew he was dying, but again, like that is like a bad thing. Like you're not supposed to kill yourself in those faiths, because it's up to God, not up to you. But that's very interesting for somebody. Like you can almost rationalize your way out of anything, and you can rationalize your way into anything too. I don't know. I don't know. I think we do that now a lot, where you see people kind of rationalizing weird stuff. Like, I think even the cat, like, the kind of trad cat stuff, like, is rationalized into it. You kind of rationalize your way into this. This'll fix me, blah, blah, blah. I find myself doing, whenever you make a mistake, if you have a big brain too, where you're constantly thinking and monologuing to yourself, you can easily give yourself reasons for why it was good or why it was bad. People, artists in general, we tend to be a little hard on ourselves.
Right.
Says no, please.
Oh, sorry. It is almost as if these two men like rationalize themselves into these ideological systems that are kind of refuted by the way their lives end. We've covered like Naphta's suicide and how that kind of refuses Catholicism, but then Settembrini, who believes in this narrative of secular progress, ends up withering away. Like his activity, he retreats, or like, I'm trying to find the words, like he stops writing for that humanist encyclopedia. He becomes like really old and weak. I think he starts using a cane by the time he sees Hans Castorp after the war. I don't know if like Mann intended it that way, but it's almost as if Peepercorn is the only person that's like vindicated. Like, oh, like he dies, but he gets the girl because he's charismatic physically.
Yeah, exactly. That all of and you can trap yourself. You can disappear into this. This is what crazy people do, right? Is you spend too much time in your head and not enough time in the physical world. This is what everybody complains about with being too online. You're too online, meaning you're not talking about reality, and you've rationalized yourself into this like whatever clique, social scene, belief
harsh or the
system. Yeah, like kind of, yeah. I mean, you're close enough to New York, right? That like that kind of scene that is just kind of
the inward
exploding.
cringe. Yeah.
Yeah, like it just
Yeah.
you can lose yourself in it, and maybe
Mm.
that's something where you can. That's interesting too, because I think Man maybe shows all these characters losing themselves, no matter how sure they
Right.
were of their convictions. Whereas Settembrini would say, form opinions, you know, have reason and stuff. No matter how sure you are of that, you know, it can always be smashed, and you kind of have these ending where you just. Because I think Settembrini's almost set up like this too, right? Where like, and when he first meets him, he's a talker, and I'm a talker. So I have a podcast, right? I like to talk, and I like to talk to people, and like I'm social, and I'm interested. You know, I like people's thoughts, and I want to hear them. And it's he kind of is like a blowhard almost when he first meets him, and like Hans Castorp keeps obsessing over his clothes and like what he's wearing, and kind of. Maybe this guy's full of shit, and then you kind of learn that he kind of withers away, whereas like maybe it was all talk, because when it came time to put up or shut up, okay, write your thing, like write it and contribute to the scholarly work of the field,
Right.
or the artistic work of the field, or whatever it is. Write the novel, write the scholarly book, or whatever it is, write the essay. He's not doing it, you know, and then he kind of loses himself in this endless debate going back and forth with his sparring partner, you know, NAFTA. Yeah, and then you can say Hans Castorp kind of loses himself in that too, like where he's starts off being like, well, I'm just a silly average person, and then he starts to think very highly of himself as he gets educated with these old intellectuals, and then he kind
grows a beard.
Yeah, that's the telltale sign. Yeah, that's the telltale sign. Facial hair is still like, yeah, I think almost every character kind of loses themselves, except maybe you're right, like what's his face?
Peppercorn.
Yeah, I wanted to say Peckinpah, but that's not. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, and you could even say Madame Chachot or whatever, Claudia. She might not lose herself either. She kind of is aware, even when he's confessing and like throwing himself at her feet on his knees, physically on his knees, begging her more than like that, almost like a pathetic proposal. She's bemused by it because she understands what her place is and kind of understands where she is. And it's like, oh, you little boy, like you have no idea. She's like, you think this confession of love to me like makes a difference? Like, you know, I'm going to go back home to my like, you know, little bourgeois life with my husband. And then I'm going to go to all these different resorts because that's just what I do. I just go to different sanatoriums and like spend time with my fake illness. And like, it's just, yeah, she's like, this was a beautiful moment, but like, it's over now, basically, how she puts it. And then even when she comes back later and he's like, he almost accepts that too. Like the way he's kind of standoffish and like, they don't necessarily have the same connection because it's been a year almost, you know, since they talked last. So you're obviously separated from that person, and you don't have the same connection as when you saw each other every day for several months. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, everybody kind of loses themselves no matter how sure they are here too, which is an interesting way to do it. Very literary suffering, right? Suffering through your intellectual hiccups or your, I mean, yeah, endless.
Yeah.
Yeah. I say all my little like hobby horses always come up whenever we do these, and because maybe I'm just connecting it to whatever I'm thinking, but yeah, I love when that happens because that gives me great pleasure. Like that gives me great joy to start to read a novel like this and get not just entertainment out of it, but all of this stimulation in all these different directions. And then I can bring in what I was thinking of, even like a podcast episode from like, you know, 2017 or whatever that I brought up already. Like, it's just like, that's what really, maybe that's the real truth in it, is just the stimulation you get out of it. I don't know. I'm just pulling that out of my ass.
Right, absolutely. I think that's like what I loved about this novel as well. Like earlier when I described it, when I wasn't sure about how to categorize it, I saw the two that stick out in my mind are 19th century realist novel and novel of ideas. I mean, I know that novel I realized the term novel of ideas might be a little contentious because it has like this very dry connotation as if Mann is like a detached philosopher that couldn't possibly understand matters of the heart. But I think that's so not true for this book because I mean it's so funny and like um and like I mean it's just so full of life, and I think that's kind of what draws you in initially and integrates like these very long debates as well. Like if they're not like even though they are far removed from the flatlands, like the characters themselves think that they're removed from the matters of the heart, but Thomas Mann does not think so.
Right.
Clearly. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. There's that yeah, like novel of ideas. I'm glad you brought that up because that's always that's what literary novels get accused of, right? Where they're just this kind of meandering around in nothingness, right? And I think that might be a more contemporary view of the literary novel, or the kind of, let's just use that phrase because that's the best phrase for it, the literary novel. And I think everybody knows what we mean when we say something like that, a literary novel. We mean this kind of lofty, not just beautiful prose, but like intentionally ambitious in terms of just the prose, the philosophy, the ideas, the juxtapositions. It's just very ambitious and artistically driven. And I think whenever I read kind of a literary novel from this turn of the century, or even pre-1960s, really, it's so much more than just like the ideas, you know, like that's like a hollowing out in the contemporary world of like boring literary novels, and there are plenty of them, you know. Yeah, you're in the world, you see them, they come out every year, you're like praised as this great thing, and you read them and they're just a bore, and like they don't tickle you in a certain way. Like this book tickles you in so many different ways, and I do think about that in terms of I guess I'd say the word rigor, what's expected of a novel, whereas it's not enough to just wait around in some ideas, but it's also so stimulating to just wait around in some of these ideas. So it is, there's a balance. Yeah. What makes a good novel versus a bad novel, even if they are doing like, a book of ideas or a novel of ideas, a novel of inner consciousness, right? Interiors is the one that everybody likes to use. And I mean, most of the novel is in Hans Karstop's head, Kostorp's head. So like this is, he's reflecting and thinking and doing his own stuff. And then there's like, I mean, it's probably about even in terms of interaction and talking and stuff and actual character, but like it's a lot of it is like his judgments, his reflections. It is that interior kind of literary novel style that you'd expect, but it's so much more than that. I don't know. I mean, maybe we're just missing something in the more contemporary sense when people are like, oh, I'm writing a novel of ideas, and they roll their eyes and be like, oh, well, that's going to be so boring. Like, enjoy your MFA project. But I think it is, they're at least aspiring to be in this tradition like Mann here with this. So yeah, absolutely.
Right. I think what made the debates in this novel feel so alive was the fact that these particular viewpoints were attached to characters who were grounded in their own experiences and settings and style of debate and personality, that I think that animated the arguments in a way that wouldn't have been the case had this book been like an essay or like a work of philosophy. Like, let me think. It's like it's just sorry, what's that?
No. Well, you mentioned My Year of Rest and Relaxation. I would say like that is a novel about, because not much happens in that book, right? Like, it's mostly this like idea of like this woman wants to get to this certain mental space, and she never quite gets there, although she kind of does, and it's yeah, I don't know. I mean, but you get. I mean, you do get a lot of interior in that novel. Yeah, it's definitely in the interior literary tradition, of course, and she's well awarded for it and all that, and well known for it. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a comparison where, like, yeah, where it doesn't hit the same way. So if you read that book as kind of if we use that as a contemporary kind of novel of ideas or whatever, where not a lot is happening, but this idea, this cultural thing, churn, back and forth philosophies clashing is like the main stuff, right? Like her philosophies clashing with her friend, clashing with this artist, clashing with the art scene in general, clashing with the meaning of life and all of that. And then this does something similar like that, but in a much, much bigger sense and bigger scale and deeper in terms of the philosophy. It isn't just like some chick lying around feeling apathy. It's
right.
Yeah, it's much deeper than that. And I think you're right. The kind of the characters electrify this stuff and how sure they are of it.
Right. Like that's kind of what distinguishes the Magic Mountain for me is that, yeah, like you said, it's not just like one person lying there thinking thoughts. Like there's this cast of characters and they're literally debating with each other, like clashing over their ideas. Because I think when there's one person, it can feel a little bit solipsistic in one note. And like you kind of need these physical trappings of characters in place to embody the interiority in a way.
Yeah. The interiority. I mean, and that's always interesting to me because as writers, as people trying to make something that latches onto somebody else's interiority, you know, that's the craft, right? How do you stimulate that in somebody else? Mann does it through these kind of long, lofty, and again, like the dialogue's beautiful, and he lets the characters expand for pages if they have to. Like those kinds, almost like those blocks of text where it'd just be like if somebody's having a monologue and it's just going on for pages, no paragraph breaks, and you're just like going on, and then somebody starts to rebut that, and they go on for pages, no paragraph breaks. It's just that adds that richness that you don't get in maybe what people would say the novel ideas in contemporary sense, where it's smaller scale, much smaller scale for most novels that come out now. Very, very rarely is somebody going to bother doing something this ambitious. Franzen,
Absolutely.
But even then, like his stuff is more focused around like one family usually, so 4 or 5, 6 characters instead of like a whole sanatorium full of like 100 people.
Yeah, the cream and crop of Europe as well, from all these different countries.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe that kind of like the multiculturalism angle. I didn't even think of that. All these different languages, customs, traditions, food tastes, preferences. The cigars, I remember that being interesting, the kind of conversation that Hans has with director Behrens, and like they talk about their cigar brands and back and forth and what they prefer, etc., because they're from different areas, and he's talking about like the German stuff. Even when he's confessing to Claudia in the Mardi Gras ball, she's like says something about him being like oh, aren't you a good German boy or whatever? Or like, look at you being such a good German boy. Like almost
Right. And then he's like, we Germans are life's problem child. And for Thomas Mann to have written that in the 1910s, 20s, he didn't know how prophetic he was going to be. Yeah. There's a way in which, sorry, what's that?
No, that's incredible. That's all I was going to say. That's
Yeah. Absolutely. I had that highlighted as well as so many other sections. There's a way in which if this novel has an exhortation, it would be to just form opinions. And because because even though you can subtly kind of glean a little bit of where Thomas Mann's sympathies lie, ultimately we all have a little bit of Madame Cochat or Settembrini or NAFTA within ourselves. I mean, I also found myself sympathizing with like both Settembrini and NAFTA at turns, and at the end it's like, well, maybe they just represent different human drives and instincts, and then Peppercorn, it's like, what was I gonna say? And like Peppercorn and Madame Cochat, who are just kind of like enjoying themselves, like drifting from place to place, not even thinking about these debates. And yeah, there's a part of me that's like that as well. But yeah, I mean the point of staging this dialogue, it is to kind of to get us to form our own opinion on these matters, and as opposed to coming to like one conclusion in the way that these characters do, and that ultimately eludes them.
Yeah, and though I wanted to point out too when I think it's when his cousin comes back for like after before he dies, but when he comes back and he's ill and he's getting worse, and Kastorp's going to the director and he's asking like, oh, blah blah, but like I think like Behrens gets frustrated with him and starts like the quote that I highlighted is you want everything to be harmless, Kastorp. That's the sort of fellow you are. You are not at all averse to getting involved in things that are not harmless, but then you treat them as if they were, and you think that will ingratiate you with God and man. You're something of a coward, man, a phony, and if your cousin calls you a civilian, that's merely a very euphemistic way of putting it. And then even like Kastorp's kind of is such a coward. He's like, well, that may be, Herr Behrens. There can be no question that I have many weaknesses of character, but that's the point. There can be no question of that at the moment. And what I've been trying to get from you for 3 days now is simply for me to tell you the sweet, sugary, diluted truth. You want to badger me and bore me until I reinforce your damn phoniness so that you can enjoy your innocent sleep while others wake and watch and let the gale winds blow. But you are being hard on me, Herr Behrens. It's just the opposite. I wanted to, yes, hard on you, and that's not up your alley. Your cousin is quite a different sort of fellow, a man cut from different cloth. He knows what's what. He knows and says nothing. Do you understand? He doesn't go around tugging on people's sleeves, asking to be hoodwinked with harmlessness. He knew what he was doing, what he was risking, and that's a man for you, who knows how to keep a stiff upper lip, to keep his mouth shut, which is a manly art, but not the sort of nice little bipeds like yourself can understand. But this much I'll tell you, Kastorp. If you start making a scene, raise a hue and cry, and give your civilian feelings free rein, I'll hand you your walking papers, because men want the company of men up here, if you understand me. And this is after he basically called him a coward. Said, you're something of a coward, man, a phony, and if your cousin calls you a civilian, that's merely a very euphemistic way of putting it. Because he's like, oh, it's harmless, but then like he kind of basically gets called out eventually, where it's like you're going around this sanatorium pestering everybody, pestering these people for their intellectual output, pestering me for like more time, blah blah, pestering me about your cousin. Like he's like, actually, like you think all this stuff is harmless. He's like, it's not, you know. I was just like, so it was such a moment too. Yeah, the very next line after he kind of tells him off is Hans Kastorp was silent. His face too was blotchy now when it turned pale. His tan too coppery to lose color. And then finally his lips quivering, he said, "Thank you, Herr Behrens. I now know what's what myself, since I assume you would not have spoken to, how shall I put it, impressively if things were not serious with Joachim. I dislike scenes and hues and cries myself. That was unfair of you. And when it comes to discretion, I can hold my own. I think I can assure you of that." Yeah, just fantastic. This guy, like this little, just like, nah, you want everything to be harmless, Kastorp. That's the sort of fellow you are. And yeah, you are not at all adverse to getting involved in things that are not harmless, but then you treat them as if they were. And I think that was something that's happening now, like in terms of the just asking questions crowd, the kind of, you know, this was the huge thing. I don't know. I'm sure you saw it because we're both extremely online and follow each other, mutuals online. Follow Maggie. It's linked below, listeners. But like, it's the Joe Rogan, the Douglas Murray, Dave Smith thing on the Israel-Palestine, like where Murray was making the point like this, where he said, you're pretending that what you're doing is harmless, actually. Like that, oh, we're just, anything goes. What's your thoughts on this? He's like, but like at a certain point, there is like, do you even know what the fuck you're talking about? Do you even know what you're doing, young man? Like you have no idea what you're spouting off. You have no ideas what kind of annoyance, what kind of doors you're opening up. And Settembrini kind of warns him about this too, in an intellectual sense, you know. I don't know. It just made me think of like, yeah, like there is a time where it comes where you need usually a wizened older man to tell you down, at least as a man, like to dress you down a notch. It's like, you are not doing what you think you're doing with this, actually. you're actually making a mess of things. And it's not at all clear that there's a reason behind that other than your own kind of self-indulgence. You're kind of indulging your intellectual self-indulgence, your fake concern for your cousin, but like it's really about you and like your time there and how that affects it, or like all of that. Yeah, I don't know. I was just, maybe that's a lofty comparison and people get upset about it, but still, I don't know. I was just thinking about it because that was something it's suddenly come up. We're the expert versus the non-expert, the person that knows something versus the person that doesn't. And there's this obsession right now with the pretending that institutions are dead. And I'm always saying something like, I'm not anti-institution, even though I get lumped in with that crowd. I'm not. I think institutions are too important, and I think there needs to be reform. They've gone astray. But like they're not going anywhere. The institutions will still be there, and it depends who's running them. What kind of principles are they doing? Do they want to adhere to and stuff like that? So like they're not going anywhere. You can pretend that they're not important because there were a few mistakes in recent years, and pretty big mistakes. I agree. I was criticizing all that too, but it's like they're not going anywhere. There's going to be institutional authority no matter what, and it's like, how are we going to go about this now? It can't just be a free-for-all. It has been for a couple years now, and like it seems like that's coming to a close. And I know this is a big topic, but I was just thinking about it recently and then reading this book and talking to you, and I feel like, I don't know, what are your thoughts on that? Like kind of this somebody like a Castorp who's just a curious young man, average intelligence, blah, blah, blah. He's just curious. He's interested in these people that have, what he views as wise, well thought out arguments and words, and a lot of them are. And then, I don't know, then it's just like get bashed down. But actually, you don't know what you're doing at all. Like, you're a coward, man. Like, you just want things to be harmless, Castor. That's the sort of fellow you are. You're like, oh, I'm not adverse to getting involved in things that are not harmless, but then you treat them as if they were. And yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that.
Honestly, at least like 10 people that I know came to mind when you were reading that about like wanting things to be harmless that are not harmless. There was a quote near the beginning that I found very interesting where I believe it was Settembrini who said it, that the germ of every impulse, that the germ of every impulse exists in a young person, any of which can be brought out by like circumstances or mentorship or guidance. Although I do find it interesting that it was Behrens that called Hans Castorp a coward.
Right.
Out of all the characters, you'd think it would be NAFTA, but yeah. And there's a way in which when the war comes in at the end, it's like this authority that supersedes all of the authorities that he encounters in the sanatorium. These governments, these monarchies that kind of exist outside the hermetic chamber of the sanatorium, so oftentimes that for most of the novel, neither Hans nor us are aware of, or that we can just kind of forget because they kind of melt away.
There's like little mentions of, especially with Joachim, kind of because he wants to be a lieutenant, like about the Prussians, war with the Prussians, and then kind of like, yeah, like there's like mention of there's battles going on, but it's only ever mentioned. And of course, Hans, this is the perspective we get the most, totally oblivious to it until the end, where he's forced on him. Yeah, like this higher authority. You could even call it, let's call it institutional to keep it in the same realm of a military, like a country's military institution is just bearing down on you. Like everybody's always got something to say until like the IRS is knocking on your door, like, like kind of thing. We're like, oh, fuck this. But also you're not going to not pay your taxes. Okay. Right. Because there's severe consequences from the institution is going to impose itself on you, whether you like it or not, because these are the rules and customs and language and yeah.
Right. And the description of it is so violent as well. The way the war splits open the mountain and kind of shakes all of these sanatorium residents off of it like ants. Like even the authority of Dr. Behrens, for instance, it's nothing compared to these monarchs when they're calling up all the patients to war.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. like, yeah, you can LARP all you want, but like there's always going to be an institutional expertise kind of authority that is going to impose itself on you, and what little say you have in it is just very little, like, yeah. So that's, I don't know, it's just interesting because I feel like that's where the conversation's approaching right now. Not that it has to be about, the Israel-Palestine thing specifically. That's just, a topic du jour right now, for everybody's talking about constantly because it's going on. It's just a thing to talk about, to tweet about, get engagement. But like, and whatever, people have strong convictions. I don't mean to diminish those, but it's just like, yeah, that's just one example of like, we were in a free-for-all for a little while because the institutions, especially during COVID, kind of failed us in a certain way. But I'm just thinking to myself, but that doesn't eliminate authority. That doesn't eliminate expertise. That doesn't eliminate institutions. Doesn't eliminate our culture that has existed for thousands of years, being built slowly towards this thing. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, and I think this is going to be bold of me to say, but I think that might be where it's headed in the next 5 years, at least in like online Twitter discourse that will trickle down into the news articles and everything else and blah, 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 MFA programs, novels, everything, right? It'll trickle down. Yeah. But, yeah, I think that might be the next direction is this like, okay, like, where do we go from here? Like there can't just be everybody free for all, especially when it comes to something important. So we can do that. And I think people confuse it too. So like something like art, we can do whatever we want. It is a free for all. We can talk about whatever we want. We can go any of these directions. But, something like determining international policy is not so simple. It's not so like anything goes. It's much more difficult. You have to get into the weeds about all of this stuff. And I don't know. I was just interested in that, seeing it. I was thinking just recently, just the other day, about reading this book and just thinking, wow, so that's where we are now. And maybe the conversation is going to shift in that direction.
Right. I mean, reading this book, all I could think about, one of the things I could think about was how we always joke, or at least the Zoomers always kind of joke, that nothing ever happens, that we live in stuck times, or like the future isn't being born, or so the saying goes. And I mean, that's possibly because we've just not seen that much history, but
because we're stuck in the sanatorium. They're stuck in the sanatorium. Yeah.
Right. But the sanatorium encompasses all of society.
Yes.
And I mean, one would hope it does not lead to such a violent conclusion for us. I'm always reminded of this elderly military history professor that I had, who would always joke about how like, oh, like the next World War, like you guys will have to fight in it, but I'll be dead.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's always the prediction too, is the next World War is going to be deadly because it's going to be nuclear.
Right.
Which is maybe why everybody's avoided it. I mean, you could point to things like UN, NATO, these types of organizations that we specifically implemented post-World War II to avoid major cataclysmic world wars like this in the future, and so far have. At least world wars, not, obviously there's still wars going on all over the place, but like at least where every nation is involved in this and somehow we've avoided that, but it still doesn't mean we're going to avoid it forever, right? And I think that might be something where an example of, you want to pretend this is harmless, to say, oh, we don't need something like the UN anymore, or we don't need something like NATO anymore, because you're not understanding that actually this was one of the only things standing between world wars happening every 20 years. Like they were starting to in the beginning of the 20th century. Like, because,
absolutely.
We have this negotiation table that every nation can come to and say their piece and like work out a deal or something to avoid as much as possible. Again, it still doesn't avoid everything. And and it's like, oh, it's harmless to just casually disparage that, or it's harmless and maybe it is, but then when it happens at a large scale, well, now it's not so harmless. Now we're not listening to the people that are trying to prevent a world war.
Absolutely. Like people talk about these things so casually. Like, for example, I think of how people are always like, oh, like I'm gonna flee America, like after every election. And that's something I thought of in particular while reading Mann, because he was a refugee from Nazi Germany. Like, I think people kind of underestimate how difficult and monumental of a hit to your life it is to even do that. I mean, otherwise we'd all be immigrants. I mean, I could be doing those drugs in Burgoyne right now instead of talking about the Magic Mountain. But and especially in the 30s and 40s, like you have to think about like how how it was how it was you have to think about how it was there were even more barriers to it. Like most Germans at the time didn't speak English. They didn't have the internet to flatten the difference between like the countries and their culture. And I think it was like a month-long voyage by ship as well across the
Yeah.
Atlantic. Like and that was kind of the reason that was like one of the reasons I think that Hans Fallada chose not to flee Germany, because I think his British publisher literally offered to like take him out of Nazi Germany. And then Hans Fallada said like I could never write in another language nor live in any other place than Germany. And it kind of really made me think about all of the artists, writers, and intellectuals who like fled to LA. What a shocking choice, not
Yeah,
like New
yeah.
York City. Like you have to picture these like old world men like strolling on the beach in their dark suits. But like just thinking about like imagine being a writer and being plucked out of your language and cultural context into somewhere and sent somewhere that you don't where you don't even understand the tongue. I mean, that's kind of like losing a limb, and that was kind of the situation that a lot of German refugees at the time found themselves in. I mean, not so much Thomas Mann. I think he spoke English. He taught at Princeton at one point, so he must have.
Right.
But yeah,
If
just
you were educated
that
back then, you probably spoke English. Yeah.
right.
And
Like,
German, and you had to learn these languages, Latin. You had to learn these if you were studied and going to college. Like you just had to learn them.
right.
Like, yeah.
Absolutely. And it's just something that I think about whenever I hear people talk about like fleeing the country. Like, I mean, even today, it's like really not that easy. But
Right.
I mean, especially in modern time, like it, I mean, ruins some people's lives and livelihood.
And I think my dad tells stories of when my family came over here from Germany in the kind of late 1800s during that big immigration boom in the United States. And he tells
Mm,
stories about how his grandmother would speak German,
mm,
but nobody else did. And she didn't want her kids to speak it because at that time, if especially post World War II, if you were a
mm.
German immigrant and they were like speaking German, it was dangerous. Like, people didn't want to hear that, and they like, didn't have their kids learn it. They were like, no, speak English, we're American. Like, and just like that loss too, like the
Yeah.
language that you lose through generations. And now we're looking at so many generations removed. You get to me and like, yeah, I have no idea how to speak German. I teach myself little by little here every day, but it's just like, it's just kind of, there is something that you're losing here, and it's not just the food, although you are losing that. It's not just the culture, although you are losing that. It's a meaning that you get out of it. And I think that's
Mm,
something that maybe people were playing fast and loose with too. You see this kind of nationalistic turn all over the world right now.
mm.
And obviously we talk about America
Right.
because we're in America and we live here and blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah, and we're Americans. But like, I think the reason for that is because for a while there, we did treat it as if it was harmless to just
Mm,
not think that's important. To like think that like,
mm,
oh, having pride in where you're from, or even like, yeah, the culture, the institutions, the food, whatever, the little practices at Christmas or holidays, you know, I don't know. I don't know. And it's interesting too. Like you think of how much the German food, like American food is mostly German. And then like with
it
other
really
things
is like
mixed
a
in.
deep
Yeah.
fried version of it.
Yeah. Like pork, stuffed pork, and like, yeah, like kind of like it's very, yeah, I don't know. I never even thought about it until recently. But yeah, I mean, people are like, oh, you're pretending that it's harmless, but actually it can be very harmful to people's well-being, like losing your
Mm,
spiritual identity, maybe we'll use that word,
mm,
like who you think you are, and then you're kind of thrust into this world by force. It's not like you wanted to, in like a
yeah.
Hans Castorp thing where you're suddenly plucked out of your comfort area and like shoved into this alien planet with its own language and customs, like going to the sanatorium.
Mm,
And I think online is an apt comparison because it does, people say echo chambers, but let's say they're sanatoriums where like there's customs, there's language, there's humor, there's certain styles
mm,
of jokes. When you get involved in these kind of niches and subcultures in the online spaces, and it can consume you, and it can thrust you suddenly out of reality if like you're getting too far into it. Usually you
mm.
get dogpiled or something. You got dogpiled recently, didn't you? You pissed off the alt-lit scene or something, Maggie? What did you...
All the time.
Yeah.
Happens every month. Just kind of like blends together in my head.
So
Yeah.
like you get like this kind of hit with reality or hit with another world that's outside of the sanatorium that we occupy. Where like if you're occupied, you say something and it is, I don't know. And then yeah, I saw some of that, but I was just like, oh, what's going on with this? I was like, Maggie's getting ostracized by the alt lit community, the alt quote alt alt lit community, supposedly.
All with many quotes around it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so experimental.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think people would be surprised to know how little, how how indistinguishable a lot of so-called alt-lit is from like what people are writing in MFAs. But that's another topic.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you're right about that too. Because people are involved in the alt-lit scene, they start to believe that they're like this vanguard of something.
Mm.
It's like when people say, "Oh, well, I'm a dork. I read Stephen King novels or whatever." It's like, "Oh, you read literally one of the most popular novelists to ever live." Like, "Oh, you're such a
Right,
dork.
right.
Like, you're such a loser." Like, "Oh, yeah, he's only
Yeah.
sold 350 million copies worldwide." Like, "Oh,
Mm.
yeah, you're just so niche." Like, no, like,
Right. Absolutely.
yeah,
It's like, oh, you're writing autofiction about being a young woman in New York City. Welcome to the club, the
yeah,
Half Lung Club.
exactly, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And you do get insular
absolutely.
and you get brought into it. But yeah, I saw that. I meant to ask you about it. Yeah, I saw you pissed off a few of the alt-lit figures. I don't even remember what it was. What even was that tweet that pissed them off?
I think it's just used the word positionality, which I guess like is like quote unquote woke academia coded.
Oh,
Like,
right.
yeah, yeah, which
In
I mean,
favoring institutions, and people get pissed if you favor an institution. Like, yeah,
right.
yeah.
It's all very knee jerk, like, which I mean, I kind of understand the impulse to some extent because that
Hmm.
was kind of how I felt like maybe 3 or 4 years ago when I was a little bit more insecure about like my place in the literary community. I mean, I did not have a good time like in undergrad, so there's the anti-institution
Right.
instinct, and just not really coming from like a family that cared about culture or having had a lot of or having had any like literary mentors throughout my life. There's there is this impulse to be like, oh well, I didn't want you anyway. Like, but I think you develop a more nuanced view as you like kind of like get older and like have more experiences with literary community and kind of like meet more people from different walks of more writers from like different walks of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that, or at least that was what happened in my case.
I said, yeah, so your mentions were ruined for like a few days, right? Like you were just logging in and it was like 99 like notifications and it's just like, oh,
I'm used to it at this point.
yeah, yeah. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
I will say that interaction that Hans Castorp had with Teen Apple or whatever that relative with the oddly English name James or something, that kind of does remind me a little bit of like what it's like to talk to not even just like people who are too online, but perhaps like in a different sanatorium of the internet
Yeah,
where you can tell that the style of discourse, the terminology used, the outlook is something that people in that milieu perhaps share, but is not widely shared. And you're just kind of left thinking like, who thinks that? Like, who thinks that's normal to think or
right.
say? Yeah, and I mean, I could see why Teen Apple like made such a sudden, speedy, and jarring departure from the sanatorium. I mean, he was like, I've had enough. I've seen and
Yeah.
heard enough.
There's like a
Yeah.
repulsion. Yeah, like yeah.
Mm,
I always tell people like trust your instincts when it comes to stuff like
mm,
that, especially now in the internet
right.
age because everybody's saying everything.
Absolutely.
You can find
Yeah.
whatever you're looking for, if you're looking for something, you'll find it like on the internet. So it's just like trust your instincts. Like what's your gut telling you about these people and like what they're saying, like what is that like. Yeah, and I don't know, but yeah, that's always just. I mean, that's going to become a bigger rift. But like you said, I think you're right.
Mm,
There's the alt lit scene. Again, even the name of it is kind of dumb, but it's just like it's. They think they're doing something other than like writing '90s transgressive fiction, but like that's what it is. And it
yeah.
feels like you're an outsider because the publishing, like the mainstream big five publishing industry has moved
Mm,
away from that kind of 90s, what's his name? I'm thinking of the Jesus' Son guy, Dennis Johnson. You know, he was huge and doing that gritty kind of transgressive 90s style fiction, early 2000s style fiction. I think that's what the alt-lit scene is doing now, but they think that it's doing something more. And I do appreciate the kind of fuck you attitude in it, of course.
Right,
but
right.
I always tell people, I'm like, my problem with the alt-lit scene is the same problem I have with the mainstream publishing scene, is that it's kind of bad. Like, it's kind of just not good. Like,
A lot of work is bad.
yeah, like that's
regardless of pose or scene.
yeah, it's basically that's my only metric. And I'm just like, I have the same problem with both scenes. So like, I don't know what you're talking about, dude. It's
I mean, sometimes
kind of bad.
sorry, what's that?
Honestly, it's kind of bad. It's kind of
Yeah.
bad.
I mean, I kind of wonder how helpful that term transgressive even is now that we're all in our little silos. It's
Yeah.
like there is no mainstream to kind of transgress against anymore. Like for example, like for example, when people mention like poop or bodily fluids or sex, and like this isn't really transgressive to me because
Right.
I'm around people who talk about that openly all the time. Sometimes I wonder if like the true transgression now is for a work to kind of take us out of our own, to kind of take us out of our surroundings and our context and kind of have us experience the other, the foreign. I think that's something that would feel genuinely new and transgressive to me.
Yes.
The sublime, I suppose.
Yes, I think you're 100% right. Yeah, it's almost boring. Oh, you're injecting drugs into your veins. It's like, well, Dennis Johnson already wrote those books 30 years ago. Like, okay, like, oh, you're train spotting. Like, you're doing that kind of. Okay, like, yeah, it's cool. It was cool in the 90s, dude. Like, yeah, almost like. And maybe they get off on that too, because like, yeah, I'm not even like somebody that I wouldn't even call myself like transgressive in my work or something. Like, I'm much more, I like traditional, I like poppy elements, I like basic bitch things. Like, I think there's a lot of those that are good. And when I was in college, especially, I don't think we're that. I'm 35. I think we're like 10 years apart. We're like just generationally.
I'm 27.
Okay.
So even less than that.
Good. Yeah. So we're like, in college, I remember that was the thing. It was the thing. It was, like, oh, look at how I describe this turd, or I'm shitting on the toilet. I'm going to write a whole novel about it. Like, and I guess there was that article recently by what's his face. I don't even know his name. The guy about exactly what you're saying, right? About how when you read some of these quote unquote alt lit writers, it doesn't actually feel all that transgressive at all. Actually, it feels very kind of traditional. This is what literary fiction has been the last 35 years. And there was a slight blip over the last 10 years where there was kind of a favored towards, kind of the identity or the political side of things. But of course, there's always ebbs and flows. It's always going to go back and forth, like in terms of culture and what's happening, what's trendy, what's popular, what's, so, I mean, of course, it's going to spin back around to something else. Like, and I think we're living through that now. So it almost feels like if you're too obsessed with those things, you're almost kind of a loser now, because like it's kind of shifting even further. Like, to be anti the publishing industry or something, it's almost like, okay, well, what's the alternative here? Like, what are you building? What are you trying to put out? And is it all that different? I don't know. Transgressive fiction. And everybody wants to be, because you want that kind of edginess. You want that kind of, I'm unafraid to do this. But really, most of those transgressive books, I think of the beats. I just had a guest on where we kind of went into the beats a little bit, and I was just like, most of their shit sucks. Like, most of it doesn't hold up. It's like, it was really transgressive in the 50s and early 60s. It's kind of incoherent babbling now. Like, it's just kind of, it was too obsessed with being against the mainstream, and you get in that sanatorium effect where you're almost kind of confronted with the reality. You're in this little group that has its own language and customs, humor, etc., little sub-internet culture or whatever, and then you're kind of not even paying attention to the larger world and what's happening. I don't know. That's an endless question too.
Right. I feel like that word transgressive itself, there's something a little bit cringe about like someone applying it to themselves. Like it's
Right.
something that others have to apply to you. Like otherwise it just kind of comes across like, oh, like look how edgy I am. Like, what was I gonna say with that? Like, and I think like what every writer, regardless of like scene or institutional affiliation or age or genre, has in common in America, from what I've noticed, is like everyone kind of like fancies themselves as subversive, like whether that's like the alt-lit scene as you just described, or like someone being like, oh, like I'm the first woman of color to write about this.
Right.
But I feel like there's almost a market imperative to do that because like everyone kind of is like driven to figure out what stands out about yourself in some way. So like it's like I'm sympathetic to the urge, but it's just something that I've noticed. It's like it's like all of these writers think they're so different, but at the end of the day, there's a very similar core.
Yeah, it's like hang out in an MFA program, dude. Like you'll see it. Like, you
Right,
see it.
right.
Yeah. You know,
Yeah.
speaking of all this, I forgot to ask you in the very beginning. Like, how did you even discover this podcast? How did you come to? As I know, we were ended up being mutuals on Twitter and stuff like that. But I was just, and I guess it's been almost a year or so when we kind of started following each other, and like, yeah, we were just on similar vibes. And like, wait, I don't know, how did you come to? I'm just curious about that, like how people find it and all that, and the noise and stuff like that. I usually ask this in the beginning, so sorry, but
I'm I'm trying to remember because it was a while ago.
yeah,
I think I think I initially found you on Twitter at the time, and I was like, oh, like he has a podcast. And at the time, I was like working my paper pushing day job that kind of just permitted me to like dissociate and like listen to podcasts while doing everything. And yours was one of the several literary podcasts I listened to. I think there's also Art of Darkness, Book Fight, True Anon. That's not a literary podcast, but yeah,
but they're in
I
the
remember
same vein. It's like in this kind of like
right.
cultural milieu of like where the podcasts are coming from. Yeah.
Right. And I really appreciated like the sense of humor that you brought to each episode and just the fact that you kind of like weren't afraid to be honest and direct about the books that you discussed. Like if you didn't like something or like yeah, just very off the cuff.
Yeah, I appreciate that too. And I'm always just curious because I whenever there is a literary controversy or something, I start, I see it online and I'll like go check it out. And I remember like I discover that I'm blocked by like half the people on literary Twitter, and I'm just like, oh, they know who I am. Like, so I'm always curious. So I'm always grateful when somebody sees what I'm trying to do with it. Yeah, like. And not like just lump it
Right.
into like, yeah, the kind of podcast milieu that all these other ones are in. Although it is part of that, you can't deny it. It's not up to me.
Right.
But yeah, I agree.
Totally. Yeah. And I think at that point too, like the literary podcasts that I listened to and literary Twitter were kind of like my only literary community, quote unquote, at the
Yeah.
time, just because like I
It's
didn't
for a
have
lot
any
of
like
people.
friends who read
Yeah.
or at least not friends who read the kinds of books that I was interested in. So yeah, that kind of like filled the void for me back when I lived in Boston before starting the MFA.
I think that's true though. There's a lot of people that their only place they can find this stuff is the internet, either social media or like Reddit
Right.
forums or even 4chan forums or something people go on.
Not anymore.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
But just I mean
Yeah.
that's like the only place you can find it, and then there's such a smorgasbord. You can just pick whatever you want from this huge, content factory of me and other podcasts and whatever else, that are in there. Because it is crazy too.
Yeah.
Like I discover new ones all the time where I'm just like, oh we're doing this to get the same thing. And so yeah, I'm always just interested in how people come to it, and it's like, because podcasts are such a weird thing when you find them. Like there's always something that leads you to them, and then like you're even like for me, it's like I don't even like them at first. I'm like, this podcast is stupid, and then you start listening. I kind of like it, and then you just
It grows
become
on you.
you just become a patron or whatever. You're just like, I
Yeah.
like it. Yeah, I'll pay for it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like weird. It's like how you meet people. That happens to me with people often too, I guess. But yeah, I'm glad we did this, Maggie, too. Because all right, final verdict, final thoughts. What do we think of the novel? What do we think? I mean, again, I'm glad we rescheduled this because I assumed that we wouldn't be able to cover it in 2 hours, and I think we're on 3.5 now.
Oh my God, the time just slipped by
Yeah.
like it did in the novel.
Good. That means we had
Yeah.
a good time. Yeah. But yeah, final verdict. What do we think? Final verdict of Man, The Magic Mountain, alt lit. Final thoughts. What do you think?
Oh my goodness. I feel like I should have prepared a statement, like a concluding statement for this. But yeah, this was an incredible book. I'm like I said earlier, I'm so glad I picked it up. I really do want to read this again in the future. Not quite so soon, just because of the length, but perhaps in like 10 years or so, just to kind of see how these thematic debates have aged in that time. What else? Um, but yeah, I'll also sorry, I'm like scrolling through my notes
No,
and seeing if
please.
there's
Yeah.
like anything that
Anything we forgot. Yeah, it's the time for it. Really.
yeah. What else?
I mean, I personally highlighted those. Like, I like marked all those kind of debates that I was enamored with that we spent so much time talking about, just because I was like, I'm coming back to this at a certain point. Yeah. So absolutely that. I mean, would you recommend it? I mean, yeah, I'd recommend the book. If you haven't read it, read it. Again, it's one of those books. It is on a pedestal. It is in the canon. It is considered a masterpiece, and it is. But also, you're probably not going to get assigned this in school. You have to seek it out on your own, or listen to this podcast companion with it, read along with us, whatever. Send me an email. I'm always open to emails. Yeah, when people hear me and Maggie talk about this, have something to add, something to disagree with, I'm always open to that.
Right, totally. Like that's why I've been evangelizing this book, like both online and in real life.
Yeah, you've been doing great promo for this, actually, by the way. Yeah, like I've been noticing your Magic Mountain tweets. I was like, yeah, Maggie is promoting the shit out of this. It's all going to make sense to your followers when this is released in a few weeks. Yeah.
It wasn't even intentional. It was just like, I think the mark of a great book is like when I feel the urge to like talk about it, to like seek other people to talk about it with, when it leaves me with like things to think about. Which this book absolutely did. I mean, I feel like even just like these 3 hours of conversation have scratched maybe like 10% of like the thoughts that I had reading it over the 3 months that I did. And also like, don't be put off by like the length or the prose or Thomas Mann's reputation, which apparently is one of stuffiness and solemnity, because this is actually a really funny book. You'll find so many types of guys that are still around today. We didn't even touch on that incel guy that was like ranting in the carriage. Yeah, like Madame Cochat was in the carriage in front, and then he's like ranting to Hans Castor, like, oh, she doesn't love me, I'm gonna kill myself. Like, and also like that. The other guy that had like a gun in his room, Herr Albin.
Oh,
like,
yes, with the knife.
To, like, show the ladies, yeah, and then he holds it to his head in front of them, and they're like, "No, don't kill yourself. Life can still be beautiful." Like it just feels like crazy, unexpected, absurd characters like that. Like this, like there, I could go on, but I'm just gonna like end on those two anecdotes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we didn't even barely scratch the surface for it. That's absolutely right, because I mean there's so much in this, so much to go for.
We've barely climbed like the first the first 1,000 feet or whatever of the Magic Mountain. I don't know my climbing terminology, but
that's interesting too. I didn't even think about the title. Like, what do we think of that? Like the Magic Mountain, like
the mountain where magic things happen.
Right. Yeah. Or just kind of the mysterious air, the unexplainable like seasons, and or maybe the maturity, the growth, the allure of the mountain, the comfort of the routine, the comfort of the dinner bells and the rest cure. I mean, who wouldn't want to pay to like have all their meals taken care of for them, and like literally say, oh, you have to lounge around for several hours a day in the sun, and like read and study or whatever you want to do. Like, oh, it sounds like great. It sounds like a luxury resort. Yeah, like of course.
Absolutely. I think the mountain itself has like kind of like mythological implications that I'm not like super familiar with.
And there's that's all throughout the book too. We didn't even touch on that. Like, the mythology and all that.
That could be like another 8 hours of conversation and like 100 more pages of like background reading. Like, I mean, I just kind of thought he probably like initially picked that location because of his wife going to a similar such sanatorium, and like just like the distance that it affords Hans Castorp, away from the concerns of the so-called flatlands.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Maggie, this has been fantastic. Again, thank you so much for doing this, taking the time and come on here and have like a 4-hour conversation about the Magic Mountain, plus the months leading up to this to actually read it and all that. Yeah, I really appreciate that. I know it's a labor of love for this too. So yeah, we love it having it come on here. Please come back. Please come
No
back
worries. I really
anytime.
enjoyed this conversation. Once again, thanks for like even like recommending this to me. Like this was life-changing. Like not to like be cliche, but
Yeah.
some books have that effect.
I mean, I seek that out in every every work of art. Like, I want to be moved to that life-changing point. Like, I want that so
Absolutely.
bad. I want every piece of art I consume to do that to me. And of course they can't, but it's, yeah, absolutely. Drop your handles,
Yeah.
website, Substack. What do you have where people can find your stuff? Where can people find you?
Oh my God, I deleted my Substack. But yeah, I'm the only social media I have is like Instagram and Twitter, which both have the same handle. I hope to like release some work or like try to get like a short story published before I finish the MFA. Like, I mean, it's not even until like probably this year when I even feel like I'm in a position where I'm comfortable like sharing that. So
Right.
yeah, that's yeah.
I mean, yeah, well, yeah, your social handles are all going to be linked below as well. So it's going there. But we didn't even talk about that. Yeah, you're in your second year MFA? Or you're starting?
The very end of my first year.
And that's
Yeah, so I have like one more year left.
2-year program.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah,
Flies by.
yeah. It really does. I was in a 3-year program and it flew by.
Mm.
But you do, I think, in that second year, you will. Yeah, you'll see it start to come together. At least what direction you want to head and like where you want to be published. If you should just do it yourself, or yeah.
Right.
Because I started doing that too. Like, I did the Substack because, I came out of an MFA. I was sending 100, making hundreds of submissions a year, a couple hundred, to get, 1, 2, 3 pieces published a year. And that's the
Yeah.
norm. Like, that's the norm. That's what you do. So like I was doing that, but then I did reach a point where I'm like, I'd probably get this, probably maybe a little bit less, but probably the same amount of eyes on it if I published myself on Substack and just like spam people's timelines.
Yeah.
Than as I would, to get into this kind of mid-tier journal, which is what I was getting. I've never gotten into a big journal or anything that would be like a great career thing. It's always just mid-tier or lower, like, and that's fine. But then I was just like, maybe I could just do this myself and stop waiting 6 months for a reply. So I'm kind of going down that road now, and it's crazy too. Like, I have stacks of shit on this because I've been planning to do this for so long, to like go the Substack route. But then I had a baby, and like, I'm the type of person that I can't just write something and put it out. Like, I have to write it. It has to sit for a certain amount of time. I do another draft that has to sit. And so like, it's like, okay, I'm going through 4 cycles here before I feel comfortable sharing that, even to like a workshop or something, let alone to publish it as like mostly finished or not finished, if not finished. So like, yeah, I encourage it though. Yeah, you're going to find your way, and just, if Substack is the way, do it. If you want to just publish essays, whatever. I mean, that's one of the cool parts. It's a fucking free-for-all right now in terms of that. Obviously, the institutional route is the easiest and well, not the easiest, but the fastest way to get to where you want as a writer. But, that has its own challenges too. And there's a lot of people trying to elbow you out. There's a lot of competition. So, but it's also like the internet exists and you can just put stuff out. So, I mean, yeah, I'm excited to see whatever you're going to put out, Maggie. What is your style?
Thank you.
What do you usually do? Yeah. It's hard to categorize yourself. What are you into right now in terms of your writing and stuff?
So currently I'm working on a novel that's like set in East Germany.
Oh,
And
yes,
it's about
here
like,
we go.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's about like a woman who works for the Stasi and like kind of uses that position to really kind of like stalk or intrude upon the privacy of like the people in her life. But I've also been experimenting with short story. So yeah, oh my God, I always like blanket that question.
Yeah.
Sorry, I feel like I'm like stuttering so much as the episode goes on. Ugh.
No.
Yeah.
That's just normal conversation. That's just what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Something about, and it's like every time that awareness of being recorded like dawns on me, it's like all the words get like sucked out of my brain. Like,
Yeah, it's like being put on the spot. Like when you're like, oh, like, I know this stuff, I know this topic, and then somebody asks you
Right.
directly, and you're like, but you know the answer, but you just can't make the yeah.
yeah.
You do get used to that if you keep doing it and just embarrass yourself regularly on the podcast, like I do. And then like you start to be like, yeah, okay, like yeah. But yeah, you this was fantastic, Maggie. I think it was great. It's going to be
Yeah, I hope so.
one of the cherished
I look for-
episodes of Heavy Board.
Thank you. I look forward to hearing the final result as well. But yeah, thank you so much for having me on. This was a pleasure. I've been like looking for an outlet to like talk in depth about the Magic Mountain, which is kind of hard to find. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate this.
Yeah, of course. Please come back
Yeah.
anytime. Yeah, we'll have to do something else. We'll find something else that we want to. Maybe
I'm
we'll
open
just,
to that.
yeah, maybe
Yeah.
we'll just stay in the German translations, and we'll see. But yeah, I mean, there's so much out there. But yeah,
I mean, if you ever do
absolutely.
Hans Fallada, like,
All right, let's do it. I've never even heard of
Yeah.
him. Yeah, I've never even heard of him.
he's like, let's say if Thomas Mann was Apollonian, Hans Fallada is Dionysian. Like, just because his life was so wild. Like, I think he and like we don't have to include this in the episode, but like yeah, like he survived a suicide pact with this another boy that he had a crush on as a teenager. And then I think he tried to like shoot his wife like during the war. That was like what got him put in the asylum. Just like really strange. He was kind of like the German Dostoevsky in a way, in that his prose style is a lot more like messy and unrestrained, and he kind of like deals with like the dark, seedy underbelly of like German society, particularly like in Nazi Germany.
Right.
But yeah, really crazy guy.
Let's do it. Yeah, I'm all for it. Yeah, this is about expanding the horizons, and that sounds like a good way to do it. Expand those horizons.
Yeah.
But yeah, all right.
Mm. Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna stop.
Any final words on your part?
No, I said it all. I went through all my notes at least. But yeah, read the book.
Sounds good.
Read the book. Follow me. Follow Maggie. Buy this book, and it's linked below. All that good stuff. Yeah.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy
Bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. Dinner,
Resources.
life, friends is boring. We must not say so. Are you radioactive, pal?
Inner.
Resources, American resources.
Being bored?
Some activities are intentional, right?
It shows such a lack of gratitude for life. Bored. I aspire to boredom, I should say.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy
Bored.
Has you the night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.
If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right, Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, jerk shop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard.